Chapter 118. Inside the Sky Pillar sect, there was a mountain called Qi Shao. This mountain was located in the center of the 9 peaks of the Sky Pillar sect and was also the core of the sect protecting array. At the top of Qi Shao Peak was a magnificent palace called the Sky Pillar Palace. At this moment, the Sky Pillar Palace was empty except for a middle-aged man in a golden robe who was sitting on the sect master's throne. This person was tall and sturdy, handsome, and naturally exuded a powerful and noble aura. Although he looked to be in his 40s, his hair was already white, and his eyes contained an aura of vicissitudes that didn't match his face. This kind of aura could only be possessed by someone who had been tempered by the vicissitudes of time. He was the current sect master of the Sky Pillar sect, a peerless powerhouse who shook the Tianxing region, Chu Tianxing. Chu Tianxing was frowning and pondering, and there was a hint of worry between his brows. At this moment, Yun Yao, who was dressed in a white dress, stepped through the door and quickly came to the main hall. She looked up at the middle-aged man on the sect master's throne and bowed respectfully. Disciple greets sect master. Only then did Chu Tianxing collect his thoughts and look at Yun Yao. He said in a low and kind voice, "Yun Yao, come here. Master has something to tell you." Yun Yao quickly stepped forward and walked to the steps of the throne, standing 3 meters away from Chu Tianxing. "Master, you just came back and summoned disciple here. Is it because of that matter?" Chu Tianxing nodded slightly and said with a worried expression, "Yes, it's because of that matter." After a pause, he said in a low voice, "Yun Yao, you are the disciple with the most potential under Master. You are also the chief disciple of the Sky Pillar sect and have been internally decided to be the next sect master. After Master abdicates in the future, you will still be in charge of the Sky Pillar sect. Therefore, Master has to tell you something so that you can be prepared." Hearing Chu Tianxing's words, Yun Yao frowned and had a bad premonition in her heart. "Master, you are at the peak of your strength, and it won't be a problem for you to be in charge of the Sky Pillar sect for another 100 years. Why are you suddenly saying such heavy words today? Could it be that matter has already affected the safety of the Sky Pillar sect?" Chu Tianxing nodded and said with a serious expression, "That's right. Yun Yao, you are really smart. Didn't you always want to ask about that matter? Today, I will tell you the truth. Listen carefully." Yun Yao understood the importance of the matter, so she no longer interjected. She listened with a solemn expression. Chu Tianxing said with a heavy tone. 1,000 years ago, a peerless demon appeared in the Tianxin region. He wreaked havoc everywhere and brought disaster to the people. That demon willfully slaughtered the innocent and destroyed countless cities, resulting in the deaths of nearly 10 million civilians. He has committed a monstrous sin of slaughter. That devil even killed his way into the ancient realm of stars and destroyed a few large sections. He slaughtered thousands of people and plundered countless treasures. Coincidentally, an otherworldly expert appeared and defeated the demon with a single sword strike, suppressing him beneath the Red Cloud Peak. At that time, our sect's founder witnessed it with his own eyes and was fortunate enough to receive guidance from that master. So, our sect's founder moved 8 mountains and placed them around the Scarlet Firmament Peak to form a sealing array. Later, our sect's founder established the Sky Pillar sect. As our sect grew stronger and stronger, we suppressed the Sky Pillar sect for generations. The deeds and legends of the Sky Pillar sect gradually disappeared. Hearing this, Yun Yao's big clear eyes were filled with shock. It was the first time she had heard of this legend. Only then did she know that the 9 mountains of the Sky Pillar sect formed not only a protective array but also a sealing array to seal the Sky Pillar sect. At this time, Chu Tianxing continued. 2 years ago, Master noticed that the sect's protective array was somewhat abnormal and found that the sealing array had been damaged. The Sky Pillar sect's founder has been sealed for thousands of years and is about to awaken. A month ago, Master brought 8 elders to the foot of the Scarlet Firmament Peak and strengthened the seal. However, the Sky Pillar sect's founder has awakened and will break the seal sooner or later. Back then, the Sky Pillar sect's founder caused a bloody storm in the Tianshan region and slaughtered millions of people. All the sects were helpless and were almost destroyed by him. If it weren't for that master, the Tianshan region would have been covered in blood and all the sects would have been destroyed. Now, if the Sky Pillar sect's founder breaks the seal, he will definitely take revenge on our sect and the Tianshan region. At that time, I'm afraid that no one will be able to resist the Sky Pillar sect's founder. The Tianshan region will also be plunged into misery and suffering. Yunyao listened carefully. Her eyes were filled with shock and worry. She frowned and asked, "Sect Master, there are 8 sects in the Star Ancient Realm now. There are countless experts and tens of thousands of elite martial artists. Can't they deal with the Sky Pillar sect's founder?" Chu Tiansheng shook his head gently and smiled bitterly. "Yunyao, you haven't succeeded as the sect master, so you don't know the secrets from 1,000 years ago. You also don't know how terrifying the Sky Pillar sect's founder is. Which of the sects that were destroyed by the Sky Pillar sect 1,000 years ago wasn't stronger than our Sky Pillar sect? In the end, no one was able to stop the Sky Pillar sect's founder. Those sects were also destroyed." Yunyao frowned and asked again, "But Master, the Sky Pillar sect's founder has been sealed for 1,000 years. His strength must have decreased greatly. He's not as strong as he was at his peak." Chu Tiansheng pondered for a moment with a solemn expression before he explained, "Yunyao, when you were young, I told you about the demon race. The demon race is a very mysterious and terrifying race. They are the most brutal and bloodthirsty race in the world. This race is different from us humans. They are born with stronger bodies and more outstanding cultivation talent than humans. Moreover, the cultivation methods they practice are very bloody and evil. The speed at which they increase their strength is several times faster than humans. The Sky Pillar sect's founder sealed under the Scarlet Firmament Peak can quickly increase his strength through bloody slaughter. My race absolutely can't understand that kind of strange and evil cultivation method." Yunyao nodded with a solemn expression, "Disciple understands. However, Master, don't you have any other way?" Chu Tiansheng shook his head and said with a wry smile, "Apart from strengthening the seal, Master can only look for the Sky Pillar sect's founder. I hope that person can help our sect reopen the seal and seal the Sky Pillar sect's founder for another 1,000 years." Speaking up to here, Chu Tiansheng asked Yunyao, "By the way, have you found the person Master asked you to look for?" Yunyao nodded and replied calmly, "We've found him. He's now in the outer sect's Tempest courtyard." Chu Tiansheng's spirit shook and a gratified look appeared on his face. "Good. After Master has dealt with the sect's affairs, bring him to see me. Whether or not we can reopen the seal and seal the Sky Pillar sect's founder again in exchange for 1,000 years of peace and stability will depend on that Sky Pillar sect's founder." Chapter 119. The night was dark and there was no moon in the sky. Ji Tianqing had been busy in the Grand Peace Palace all day. When he returned to his residence in the Storm Courtyard, his stomach was rumbling with hunger. After eating dinner, he sat at the table and drank tea as he pondered over his next task. Although Deacon Han punished me to sweep the Grand Peace Palace for a month, I have already cleaned the Grand Peace Palace in this half a month. The smelly old man hasn't shown up these past few days. I won't be going to the Grand Peace Palace to work tomorrow. I have to go to the alchemy room to try refining pills. The end of the month examination is very important. If I can take first place, I will receive a very generous reward. I have to work harder." After making up his mind, Ji Tianqing drank the tea in his cup and prepared to enter the secret room to cultivate. But at this moment, a furry figure appeared from the window and a small ice blue head poked out. The small head opened a pair of silver eyes and looked around the room. Seeing that there was only Ji Tianqing in the room, it stretched out its small claws and opened the window. With a "so" sound, it flew into the room. Ji Tianqing heard the movement and subconsciously turned around. He saw the small ice-blue beast flapping its wings. It was Qian Yu. He immediately frowned and asked in a low voice, Qian, why did you run back? Qian Yu quickly flew in front of him and anxiously whispered, Old Ji, the situation is not good. Let's quickly run for our lives. Ji Tianqing looked at it with a puzzled expression and unhappily asked, What are you talking about? Why do we need to run for our lives? Qian Yu said anxiously, Old Ji, I took the risk of being roasted and eaten to sneak out of the Grand Peace Palace just to inform you of my whereabouts. You have to believe me. The Sky-bearing sect is about to face a great disaster. Let's quickly run. Ji Tianqing knew that Qian Yu had always been cunning and treacherous. How could he easily believe its words? Grabbing Qian Yu, Yang Kai brought it into the secret chamber, then smiled and said, All right, take your time and tell me what's going on. Speak clearly. Qian Yu hurriedly explained, Previously, when I was in the Great Peace Palace, I accidentally heard the smelly old man and a few elders discussing a secret matter. I heard them say that the Sky Pillar sect is facing a huge crisis. Soon, a disaster will descend. At that time, even the sect won't be able to protect itself, and blood will flow like rivers. The Sky Pillar sect is facing a huge crisis? Disaster is coming? Ji Tianqing's brows knitted together, and his expression was somewhat solemn. Qian, did you hear it from them? Qian Yu nodded solemnly. Ji Tianqing pondered for a moment and asked, Then did you hear what kind of crisis and disaster it is? Why couldn't they protect the sect? The Sky Pillar sect is the #1 sect in the Heavenly Stellar region. Qian Yu shook his head and said regretfully, The smelly old man placed a restriction on the 100 treasures brocade pouch. I could only vaguely hear a few words. I don't know what happened. Speaking of this, he anxiously urged, Old Ji, don't ask so much. Who cares about the disaster and crisis? Let's quickly leave the Sky Pillar sect. Saving our lives is more important. Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and shook his head. With a firm expression, he said, No, I can't leave yet. I must find the heavenly star bead. Old Ji. Qian Yu looked at him very seriously and said in a solemn tone, It's already a matter of life and death. Why are you still thinking about the heavenly star bead? Ji Tianqing also looked at him with a solemn expression and said, Qian, that thing is very important to me. I must find it. Moreover, even if the Sky Pillar sect really encounters some kind of crisis, there are so many experts in the sect. They will definitely deal with it. You only heard a few words and don't know what kind of crisis it is. When it will happen, how can we blindly run away? Qian Yu saw that Ji Tianqing's attitude was firm and that he had made up his mind not to leave. He could only helplessly sigh. Old Ji, I'll give you a heads up. Since you've decided not to leave, there's nothing I can do. In any case, when the Sky Pillar sect really is destroyed, I'll definitely run away. Ji Tianqing knocked his little head and said with a smile, Then we'll talk about it when it happens. What are you in such a hurry for now? That's right, you and the little black dragon stayed in the Great Palace for half a month. The stinky old man didn't mistreat you, right? Qian Yu curled his lips and said in a mocking tone, Do you think we're like you? We were beaten and abused by the stinky old man. Humph. I'm such a smart and cute little fellow. Anyone with a bit of compassion wouldn't have the heart to bully me. Ji Tianqing looked askance at him and said in a bad mood, When you say that, doesn't your conscience hurt? Qian Yu was speechless and could only roll his eyes at him. After a moment of silence, he continued, But to be honest, the stinky old man looks very hateful on the surface, but he's actually quite good to me and the little black dragon. During our time in the Great Palace, the stinky old man often took out many spirit fruits for us to eat to help us recover our strength. If I hadn't eaten so many spirit fruits and recovered a bit of my strength, I wouldn't have been able to hear the conversation between the stinky old man and the elders. As Ji Tianqing listened, his brows furrowed tightly. The stinky old man took the initiative to take out spirit fruits for you to eat? That's right. Qian Yu subconsciously nodded. Ji Tianqing's expression changed and he angrily cursed, "Humph. Damn stinky old man. He was clearly the one who took the initiative to give you spirit fruits. Back then, he even said that you stole his spirit fruits and caused me to willingly be punished by him. Too hateful." Qian Yu immediately covered his little mouth with his claws and giggled. His eyes were filled with schadenfreude. Ji Tianqing chatted with him for a while before urging him to quickly leave. "Qianqian, hurry back to the Great Palace. Don't let the stinky old man find out that you snuck out." Qian Yu waved his little claws at him before flying out of the secret room. Under the cover of the night, he quietly left the Tempest courtyard. 15 minutes later, Ji Tianqing calmed down and began to cultivate in the secret room. The vitality replenishing pill that he had taken before still had some faint effects, allowing his strength to increase at a faster rate than usual. After a night, Ji Tianqing felt that he wasn't far from the 7th level of the true element realm. Perhaps he would be able to advance next month. The next morning, he finished cultivating and walked out of the secret room. After washing up, he took out a set of ingredients for refining pills and prepared to go to the pill room to try refining pills. However, when he walked to the Tempest courtyard, he met Ji Ku at the entrance. Ji Ku had specially come to find him and had been waiting outside for a long time. Ever since Ji Tianqing entered the Sky-bearing sect, he hadn't seen Ji Ku for more than half a month. Seeing that Ji Ku had come to find him, he brought Ji Ku into the Tempest courtyard and returned to his residence. Chapter 120. Ji Tianqing chatted with Ji Ku while pouring tea for her. Ji Ku curiously looked around the room, looking here and there. "Wow, big brother Tianqing, the treatment of your Tempest courtyard's disciples is really good. Not only are the rooms very spacious, but there are also secret rooms for cultivation. It's not like our White Dew courtyard where everyone only has a small room." Ji Ku looked around before sitting down at the table and looking at Ji Tianqing with envy. Ji Tianqing only smiled and asked in a gentle tone, "Ku, why did you come looking for me so early in the morning? Is something the matter?" Ji Ku glanced at him reproachfully and pretended to be annoyed. "Humph. Big brother Tianqing, I haven't seen you in half a month. Can't I come to see you?" He, of course you can." Ji Tianqing smiled and intimately patted her head. "Ku, how have you been in the past half a month? Have you gotten used to it?" Ji Ku curled her lips and gloomily said, "Of course the White Dew courtyard's conditions can't compare to the palace. But coming to the Sky Pillar sect to cultivate is to suffer hardships. Otherwise, how can I increase my strength?" It's good that you can think like that." Ji Tianqing nodded and asked, "Then what have you been studying in the past half a month? Have you also been studying alchemy?" Ji Ku's eyes widened in confusion and asked, "What are we studying alchemy for? It's not like we can increase our strength. Ever since we entered the White Dew courtyard, we've been practicing sword arts from dawn until noon every day. We also have to meditate in the afternoon and evening. Lord Deacon said that we should focus on cultivating martial arts. We can't be distracted by other things." Ji Tianqing stared at Ji Ku in a daze. His brows slightly furrowed as a trace of doubt flashed through his heart. It seems that the contents of the 3 outer courtyards' teachings are different. The disciples of the White Dew courtyard cultivate diligently, but our Tempest courtyard wants to learn alchemy. I don't know what the deacons are thinking, but there should be some deeper meaning, right? At this moment, Ji Ku looked at him with concern and asked with a smile, "Brother Tianqing, how have you been for the past 2 weeks? Did it go well?" Successful? Ji Tianqing hesitated for a moment before squeezing out a smile. He nodded and said, yes, not bad. Humph. Big brother Tianqing, you're lying. I can tell. Ji Ku saw that his expression was strange, so she pouted and looked unhappy. Big brother Tianqing, are you in trouble? If you still treat me as a friend, then tell me. Ji Tianqing knew that Ji Ku was extremely intelligent. His reaction just now could not be hidden from Ji Ku. Thus, he could only tell Ji Ku the truth. All right. Actually, things have been going well for me for the past 2 weeks. It's just that someone is secretly plotting against me. They've already ambushed me twice. Unfortunately, I've tried every means to investigate, but I haven't been able to find any clues. I don't know who is secretly plotting against me. There's actually such a thing? Ji Ku's eyes widened, her pretty face filled with worry. Despicable bastard. He's actually so daring to ambush Big Brother Tianqing in the Sky Pillar sect. Ji Ku looked indignant, as if she was the one who was ambushed. After frowning and thinking for a moment, she lowered her voice and asked, Big Brother Tianqing, do you have any suspicions about who it is? Could it be my imperial uncle? Or, that despicable Lu Mingyang? She knew that Lu Mingyang had entered the Sky Pillar sect and directly skipped the outer court to become an inner court disciple. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said with a solemn expression, I've investigated and analyzed it. That person is neither your imperial uncle nor Lu Mingyang. Then who else could it be? Ji Ku frowned and pondered with a puzzled expression. After a moment, she suddenly thought of something and a glint flashed across her eyes. Oh right. Big Brother Tianqing, I suddenly thought of someone. I think it's very likely to be him. Ling Yunfei's cousin, Jian Yu. Ji Tianqing frowned and looked confused. Ling Yunfei's cousin? How could it be her cousin? Jian Yu. I've never heard of this person. Ji Ku quickly explained, Big Brother Tianqing, it's like this. Ling Yunfei does have a cousin called Jian Yu. 3 years ago, Jian Yu passed the Sky Pillar sect's entrance examination and left the Royal Azure Kingdom to become a disciple of the Sky Pillar sect. Since then, Jian Yu has never returned to the Royal Azure Kingdom. However, it's said that Jian Yu has always liked his cousin, Ling Yunfei. Ji Tianqing finally understood and nodded, no wonder I've never heard Ling Yunfei mention Jian Yu. It turns out that he entered the Sky Pillar sect 3 years ago. 3 years have passed. As long as his aptitude isn't bad, he should have entered the inner sect by now and gained a foothold in the Sky Pillar sect to familiarize himself with the situation. In that case, the black-clothed man who ambushed me could really be him. Ji Ku also nodded and said, Big Brother Tianqing, you've just entered the sect. There are only a few people who have a grudge with you. After excluding my imperial uncle and Lu Mingyang, only Jian Yu is the most suspicious. Big Brother Tianqing, you must be careful in the future. Listening to her worried tone, Ji Tianqing nodded to show that he understood. After the two chatted for a while, Ji Ku bid farewell and left. After Ji Ku left the Fengyun courtyard, Ji Tianqing restrained his complicated thoughts and carried the alchemy ingredients to the pill room. Ji Ling had just walked out of the Fengyun courtyard with a bag of alchemy ingredients in his hand and was about to go to the pill room to try alchemy. However, just as he walked to the entrance, he saw a burly young man standing outside the door. Ji Ling's eyes flashed with a strange light. He quickly greeted him with a smile and respectfully said, Senior brother Hao, why have you come to the Fengyun courtyard? The burly young disciple was Hao Meng. He glanced at Ji Ling and revealed a hearty smile. He nodded and said, Ji Ling, I came here specifically to find you. Ji Ling quickly asked, Senior brother Hao, what are your orders? Hao Meng patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, Don't ask first. Come with me to see senior sister. She sent me to find you. Senior sister? Ji Ling was startled. Yunyao's fairy-like face and figure appeared in his mind. Seeing Hao Meng turn around and leave, he didn't dare to think too much and quickly followed. An hour later, Hao Meng left the towering sky peak with Ji Ling and arrived at the most sacred and solemn Crimson Firmament Peak in the towering sky sect. Hao Meng brought Ji Ling to the top of the mountain and arrived at the gate of the towering sky palace. He saw Yunyao waiting at the gate. The two of them went forward and bowed to Yunyao, then Hao Meng bid farewell and left. At the gate of the majestic and solemn palace, only Ji Ling and Yunyao were left. Ji Ling's mood was a little perturbed, but there was also a faint sense of anticipation. He secretly guessed that he was brought to the Crimson Firmament Peak, where outer disciples were not qualified to approach. It was very likely that there was an important matter. Sure enough, Yunyao said to him expressionlessly, "Ji Ling, come with me to see the sect master now. Remember, you must tell the truth. If you guys like this book, please give it 5 stars when you review it. Because the system defaults to 3 stars, I hope that you can manually light up all 5 stars. Thank you very much." Chapter 121. Before entering the Sky Pillar sect, Ji Ling had vaguely learned some news. He knew that he was the person the Sky Pillar sect was looking for, and it seemed to be related to a very important matter. So he knew that once he entered the Sky Pillar sect, he would definitely be valued and cultivated. However, he had been in the sect for half a month and had not been valued. He was secretly anxious in his heart, but he could not find anyone to ask. Now he knew that the time had finally come. Hearing Yunyao's words, his heartbeat suddenly sped up, and his eyes flashed with joy. He did not expect that the Sky Pillar sect master would personally receive him. This importance and honor simply made his blood boil with excitement. However, he remained calm on the surface and respectfully cupped his hands. "I will follow senior sister's teachings." Yunyao did not answer and calmly led him into the main hall. The main hall was silent, and there was only a figure sitting on the throne at the head. It was a middle-aged man in a golden robe. His face was resolute and handsome, and he had long snow-white hair. His aura was very dignified and powerful. Ji Ling was quick-witted and of course recognized that it was the Sky Pillar sect master. He followed Yunyao into the main hall and stood still, bowing with Yunyao. "Disciple greets sect master." "Disciple greets sect master." Chu Tiansheng sat on the sect master's throne and looked down at Ji Ling. He could see at a glance that Ji Ling had the strength of the 7th level of the True Element realm and was about to advance to the 8th level of the True Element realm. Moreover, he saw that Ji Ling's appearance was dignified, and his temperament and speech were very elegant. He secretly nodded in his heart and had a plan. "You're called Ji Ling? Are you a prince of the imperial family of the Clear Sky Kingdom?" Chu Tiansheng stared at Ji Ling and asked calmly. Ji Ling felt a chill all over his body when he was stared at by his wise and calm eyes, as if he had been seen through. He hurriedly lowered his head, cupped his fists and replied, "Yes, sect master." Chu Tiansheng nodded slightly and asked again, "Ji Ling, have you seen your great-grandmother or great-grandmother?" This question immediately stunned Ji Ling. Great-grandmother referred to his grandfather's mother. His great-grandmother was his grandfather's grandmother. In the royal family of the Royal Azure Cloud Kingdom, the only living ancestor was Ji Shenshao. Thus, Ji Ling answered truthfully and shook her head, reporting to sect leader, "This disciple has never seen him before." Disappointment flashed in the depths of Chu Tiansheng's eyes, but no one noticed it. He nodded calmly and said, "That's fine. Those are ancestors from 100 years ago. It's normal that you haven't seen them before. Ji Ling, come here. Let me take a good look at you." Although Ji Ling didn't understand Chu Tiansheng's meaning, she still walked forward and respectfully lowered her head before Chu Tiansheng. Chu Tiansheng reached out and grabbed Ji Ling's wrist. He secretly released his powerful spiritual sense to check the situation inside Ji Ling's body. Ji Ling didn't know what was going on and could only stand there quietly, looking very well behaved. In reality, hundreds of thoughts were flashing through his mind. He thought to himself, sect leader is using his spiritual sense to check my situation. Could it be that he wants to check my innate talent? Fortunately, I have completely refined the God-seizing bead. My dantian is the same as an ordinary martial artist's. Sect leader definitely won't be able to see any abnormalities. A moment later, Chu Tianxing seemed to have detected something and a glint flashed in his eyes. Sure enough, it's the Xianjian bloodline. He exclaimed in excitement and withdrew his right hand and spiritual sense. He turned to look at Yunyao and said with a gratified expression, Yunyao, you've done well. This time, the three of you have done a meritorious service. I will reward the three of you tomorrow. Yunyao calmly cupped her hands and bowed, thank you, sect leader master. Chu Tianxing looked at Ji Ling and said with a smile, Ji Ling, go back to the storm courtyard and cultivate hard. I will ask Deacon Han to send you 2 heaven heart pills and 2 blood spirit pills later. With the help of these pills, your Xianjian bloodline will be refined and your strength will increase greatly. After you pass the assessment and enter the inner sect, if your character is good and your aptitude is good, I might accept you as my personal disciple. Hearing this, Ji Ling was stunned and revealed an expression of disbelief. He never thought that the surprise would come so suddenly. The honorable sect leader actually said that he would accept him as his personal disciple. Ji Ling was very clear that Yunyao was the sect leader's personal disciple and was also the #1 genius of the Tianshan region. She was recognized as the successor to the position of sect leader. In a few decades, after sect leader Chu Tianxing abdicated, Yunyao would inherit the position of sect leader and control the Sky Pillar sect and the entire Tianshan region. If he was also accepted as a disciple by the sect leader, he would have the chance to compete with Yunyao for the position of sect leader in the future. Taking control of the entire heavenly stellar region was his lifelong wish. He never dared to imagine that he would be so close to the goal he had been pursuing all his life. Thinking of this, he was so excited that his hands trembled. He was so excited that even his voice trembled. He bowed deeply and said with sincerity, "Thank you, sect master, for your guidance. This disciple will definitely cultivate diligently and will definitely not disappoint sect leader." Although Yunyao did not speak, a hint of surprise flashed through her eyes. She did not expect that her sect leader would actually say those words himself. She was very clear that becoming the sect leader's personal disciple meant that he would have the qualifications to compete for the position of sect leader in the future. What an amazing opportunity this was. However, she vaguely guessed the reason and did not say anything. Chu Tianxing smiled and nodded. He waved his hand and said, "All right, Ji Ling, you can go back." Ji Ling thanked Chu Tianxing again and respectfully bid farewell. He turned around and left the Sky Pillar Palace. After Ji Ling left, Yunyao frowned slightly and asked Chu Tianxing, "Master, you just promised to accept Ji Ling as your personal disciple. Isn't this gift too great? Could it be that he can receive such preferential treatment just because he has the Xianjian bloodline?" The corners of Chu Tianxing's mouth curled into a playful smile. He nodded slightly and said, "Yunyao, master naturally has his reasons for doing this. There are still some things you don't know about the sealing array. In fact, there are a total of 2 sealing arrays that suppress the unparalleled demon. The first sealing array was casually set up by the unworldly expert who defeated the unparalleled demon with a single sword strike 1,000 years ago. After 1,000 years, that array has been broken and its power has weakened. However, other than that otherworldly expert or his successor, no one else can control the sealing formation. Our sect seniors had long expected that the sealing array would weaken after 1,000 years at most, so they would reinforce the array every 200 years. However, this is still not a long-term solution. Our sect's seniors have long been bitterly searching for various ways. At this point, Chu Tiansheng revealed a look of reminiscence and recounted in a low voice. More than 100 years ago, our sect had an elder who was proficient in formations. When it came to formations, it was difficult to find a match in the 9 regions of the southern continent. She painstakingly studied for 36 years and finally set up the 9 dragons trapping demon formation to suppress the unparalleled demon beneath the crimson firmament peak. If the 9 dragons trapping demon formation was activated, the first sealing array would be strengthened and the unparalleled demon would not be able to break through the seal. Unfortunately, the elder left the sect and the 9 dragons trapping demon formation was completed. Her whereabouts have been unknown ever since. Chu Tiansheng shook his head with a wry smile and said in a low voice, "Speaking of which, that elder was my senior sister." Chapter 122. After listening to Chu Tiansheng's explanation, Yunyao came to a sudden realization and guessed the reason. She frowned and thought for a moment before asking Chu Tiansheng, "Master, you asked Ji Ling if he had seen his great-grandmother or great-grandmother? Could it be, you think that Ji Ling's great-grandmother or great-grandmother might be that elder from back then, your senior sister?" Chu Tiansheng nodded slightly and said in a low voice, "That senior sister of mine was also an outstanding beauty among the female disciples of our sect. Her talent in the Tao of formations was unparalleled, and many genius disciples were infatuated with her. Unfortunately, that senior sister had already made a promise to someone else, and it was said that she was from the secular world." When Yunyao saw her master's expression, she guessed that her master must have been infatuated with that elder back then as well. However, she only thought about it in her heart and would not say it out loud. She continued to ask, "Master, that elder set up the 9 dragons trapping demon formation back then. Could it be that you and the other elders have no way to open it?" Chu Tiansheng shook his head. "That elder has the bloodline of Xianjian. If you want to open the 9 dragons trapping demon formation, you must use the bloodline of Xianjian as a primer. Whether Ji Ling is that elder's descendant or not, he also has the bloodline of Xianjian. He might be able to open the 9 dragons trapping demon formation." Yunyao finally understood everything. She nodded solemnly and said, "So that's how it is." Chu Tiansheng pondered for a moment and continued, "Yunyao, I know that suddenly accepting another disciple might make you feel uncomfortable. However, this person concerns the life and death of our sect. I can only do this. I have to ensure his safety and nurture him with all my might. Of course, I want to accept him as my personal disciple because he can open the 9 dragons trapping demon formation. If he can open the 9 dragons trapping demon formation, he will have done a great service to our sect. It is only right for me to accept him as my personal disciple." Yunyao nodded to show that she understood. She quickly said seriously, "Don't worry, Master. I understand. I have to look at the big picture and will not feel uncomfortable." "That's good." Chu Tiansheng nodded with a gratified expression. "All right, you can leave now. Bring Bai Wuchen and Hao Meng here tomorrow to receive their rewards." After Yunyao bowed and thanked Chu Tiansheng, she turned around and left the heaven-raising palace. After Ji Ling left the scarlet firmament peak, she walked alone on the tree-lined path at the foot of the mountain. Even now, he still couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart, and his eyes were filled with a bright light. Great! This is my, Ji Ling's, destiny. I really didn't expect that the Xianjian bloodline would bring me such heaven-defying luck. Not only will the sect leader nurture me, he will also take me in as his personal disciple. With the sect leader's support and nurturing, I will be able to reach Tongxian realm within half a year. By then, I will be able to pass the examination and enter the inner sect, becoming the sect leader's disciple. Ji Ling's face was flushed with excitement as she fantasized with anticipation. Although Yunyao is the #1 genius of the Tianshan region and the recognized successor of the sect master, she is still a woman. After I become the sect leader's personal disciple, I will find a way to defeat Yunyao and take the position of the sect leader. By then, I will be able to achieve my lifelong goal of controlling the entire Tianshan region. Ha ha ha, thinking of this, Ji Ling wanted to laugh out loud to vent the excitement in his heart. However, after being happy for a while, he gradually calmed down. He frowned and pondered for a moment before realizing that there was a huge hidden danger in this matter. The reason why the sect leader values me so much and I can become his personal disciple in the future is because I have the Xianjian bloodline. If that's the case, if I didn't use the God-seizing pearl to take away Ji Tianqing's Xianjian bloodline, this great surprise and opportunity would have been his. Not only does Ji Tianqing know that I took the Xianjian bloodline, but even Ji Ku knows that Ji Tianqing is the one who has the Xianjian bloodline. No. I can't let them leak the news and ruin my great opportunity and luck. For my lifelong dream and ambition, I can't let Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku live. They must die. Thinking of this, Ji Ling secretly clenched his fists as a cold killing intent flashed in his eyes. He had already decided to kill Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku as soon as possible. This way, no one in the Sky Pillar sect would know the secret of him seizing the Xianjian bloodline. As Ji Ling walked towards the Sky Pillar peak, he was still silently calculating in his heart. 15 minutes later, he was walking on a tree-lined path in the back mountain when he suddenly saw a young disciple in a white robe in front of him. That young man was obviously an inner disciple. He was walking on the path unsteadily, and Ji Ling vaguely felt that he had seen him before. He quickly quickened his pace to catch up. When he reached the white-robed young man's side, he recognized that this person was Jian Yu. Jian Yu was about the same age as him, and the two of them had known each other 3 years ago. Ji Ling frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind, and he immediately had an idea. He quickly stopped Jian Yu and pretended to be surprised as he asked, "You are Jian Yu?" Jian Yu immediately stopped and turned his head to look at Ji Ling. After seeing Ji Ling clearly, he was also a little surprised. He slightly frowned and said, "Ji Ling? You also entered the Sky Pillar sect?" Ji Ling quickly nodded and said, "Yes, I just entered the outer sect storm courtyard half a month ago." Jian Yu didn't say anything, but he thought in his heart, I didn't expect that this trash prince with a damaged dantian could actually enter the Sky Pillar sect. During the new disciple entrance ceremony half a month ago, I was only focused on looking for Ji Tianqing, but I didn't find Ji Ling. At this time, Ji Ling sized up Jian Yu and asked doubtfully, "Jian Yu, your face is pale and your legs are inconvenient. Are you injured? What happened?" Jian Yu expressionlessly replied, "It's nothing serious. You don't have to worry." Ji Ling could see that he was injured and was in a bad mood. He deliberately sighed with a sorrowful face and said, "AI. Originally, Feifei was going to enter the sect with this prince. I didn't expect that right before the entrance competition, she would be cruelly killed by that bastard Ji Tianqing." When Ling Yunfei was mentioned, Jian Yu's face became even paler. His eyes were filled with hatred and killing intent. Ji Tianqing. That damn bastard, I will never let him off. Ji Ling saw that Jian Yu had fallen into the trap and probed, "Jian Yu, Ji Tianqing was framed by someone using the white sun fruit. It couldn't be that you did it, right?" Jian Yu glanced at him and said in a low voice, "So what if I framed him? If I find a good opportunity, I will kill him with my own hands and avenge Feifei." Ji Ling's face immediately turned solemn and said with a common enemy, "Jian Yu, I also have a blood feud with Ji Tianqing. If you want to kill him, count me in." Jian Yu's tone was filled with unwillingness as he said, "It's a pity that Ji Tianqing is too cunning. I have already failed once. It will be difficult to kill him again." Ji Ling revealed a confident smile and said in a low voice, "Jian Yu, I have a way to kill Ji Tianqing. Why don't we join hands?" Chapter 123. Ji Ling and Jian Yu whispered to each other for a while on the tree-lined path. No one knew what the two of them were talking about. A moment later, the two of them seemed to have reached an agreement. They nodded solemnly and parted ways. Ji Ling did not return to the wind cloud courtyard. Instead, he went straight to the inner sect at the peak of the mountain. He entered a certain house and stood outside a room. He knocked on the door with a calm expression. After a while, the door opened with a creak. Lu Mingyang saw Ji Ling outside the door and revealed a smile. He asked, "Ji Ling, why are you looking for me?" Ji Ling looked around and said in a low voice, "Brother Lu, I came to find you this time to ask for your help. Come, let's talk inside." Lu Mingyang hurriedly led him into the house and closed the door. After Ji Ling entered the house and sat down, he went straight to the point. "Brother Lu, I have already contacted an old friend. This person also has a grudge with Ji Tianqing. We have decided to deal with Ji Tianqing, but this plan needs your help to be flawless. Deal with Ji Tianqing?" Lu Mingyang grinned and revealed a sinister sneer. "Good. Ji Ling, tell me, how do you want me to help you?" Ji Ling revealed a confident smile and whispered his plan into Lu Mingyang's ear. Lu Mingyang listened attentively. After listening, he could not help but nod. "Good. Ji Ling, your plan is very good. Ji Tianqing is dead for sure. He won't be able to escape this calamity." Ji Ling looked at him and revealed a sinister sneer. White Dew Courtyard, the house where the female disciples lived. Ji Ku was meditating and cultivating in her room when a female disciple suddenly called her name outside the door. When she got up and opened the door, the female disciple handed her a letter and said that it was sent by a male disciple of the Wind Cloud Courtyard. Ji Ku thanked the female disciple and returned to her room to open the letter. There was only one sentence on the palm-sized paper. The handwriting was neat and strong. "Cuckoo, I will be waiting for you at the pavilion halfway up Jade Sword Peak. I have something to discuss with you. See you there." It was signed by Ji Tianqing. "Big brother Tianqing is looking for me?" Ji Ku put away the envelope and smiled sweetly. She opened the door with a heart full of joy and subconsciously wanted to go to the appointment. However, when she entered the courtyard, she calmed down and frowned in confusion. "If Big Brother Tianqing is looking for me, why did we meet at Jade Sword Peak? We just met today. What does he have to discuss with me?" Thinking of this, Ji Ku decided to go to the storm courtyard to look for Ji Tianqing to verify the authenticity of the letter. A quarter of an hour later, she entered the storm courtyard and arrived outside Ji Tianqing's room. She knocked on the door several times, but Ji Tianqing did not open the door. The room was also silent. At this moment, the door to the next room opened. A tall and handsome young man walked out and asked with a smile, "Junior Marshal Sister, are you looking for Brother Ji?" Ji Ku nodded and asked, "Is Big Brother Tianqing not here?" The young man with a bright smile replied, "Brother Ji went out not long ago. I heard him say that he had an appointment." Ji Ku already had an answer in her heart, so she asked, "May I ask who you are?" The bright young man smiled and said, "I am Brother Ji's friend. My name is Nie Hao." "Senior Marshal Brother Nie Hao, thank you." Ji Ku smiled and thanked him, then turned around and left. She no longer had any doubts and went straight to Jade Sword Peak. The peak where the outer sect was located was called Heaven Upholding Peak. Jade Sword Peak was behind Heaven Upholding Peak to the right and was about a dozen li away. Behind Heaven Upholding Peak was the peak where Grand Peace Palace was located. Behind it was the sect's core, Crimson Firmament Peak. Ji Ku's heart was filled with Ji Tianqing's words. She was afraid that she would make Ji Tianqing wait for a long time, so she quickened her pace. Ji Tianqing was walking on Jade Sword Peak's mountain path. His footsteps were very fast, and his face was somewhat gloomy. There was a hint of anger between his brows. That damn Ji Ling. I thought that he would restrain himself after entering the sect, but I didn't expect that he would still dare to provoke me like this. He invited me to Jade Sword Peak and said that he had secret information to tell me. This must be his scheme. What does he want to do? As he rushed to the pavilion halfway up the mountain, he was still silently calculating in his heart. Although he knew that Ji Ling took the initiative to provoke him, it was very likely that he had some scheme. But his strength had improved a lot, and he had also mastered the Flying Star Sword art. His strength far surpassed that of a normal True Element Realm martial artist. No matter what kind of scheme Ji Ling had, he was not afraid. Very quickly, Ji Tianqing arrived halfway up the mountain. He walked along the tree-lined path until he reached the end and saw an octagonal pavilion. The pavilion was surrounded by a dense forest. A young disciple wearing a green robe stood in the pavilion with his back facing him. Just by looking at that figure, Ji Tianqing recognized that it was Ji Ling. When he walked into the pavilion, Ji Ling also turned around and looked at him with a sneer. Ji Tianqing, you really came. Ji Tianqing looked at him with a gloomy expression and shouted in a low voice, Ji Ling, cut the crap. What tricks do you want to play by asking me to come here? Ji Ling revealed a mocking sneer and said in a playful tone, don't be agitated. I did ask you to come here because I have important news to tell you. Yes, to be precise, I have a piece of great news to share with you. Ji Tianqing stared at him coldly and shouted, if you have something to say it quickly. Ji Ling was not angry. His smile became even more playful as he said slowly, this morning, Senior Sister brought me to Crimson Firmament Peak's Heaven-Raising Hall to meet Sect Master. Sect Master personally checked my aptitude and confirmed that I was the person they were painstakingly looking for. Not only does Sect Master think highly of me, he even rewarded me with a large number of pills and cultivation techniques. He also wants to nurture me with all his might and accept me as his direct disciple. Heh. Ji Tianqing, do you know why? Ji Tianqing frowned as a cold light surged in his eyes. He shouted in a deep voice, Ji Ling, did you invite me here just to show off? Put away that disgusting face of yours. You and I both know very well where your talent came from. Ji Ling immediately laughed complacently. Ha. That's right. So, Ji Tianqing, I have to thank you. It's precisely because of your Xian sword bloodline that I am highly regarded by the Sect Master. In the future, I can become the Sect Master's disciple and even inherit the position of Sect Master. Hearing these words, Ji Tianqing's expression changed drastically. His eyes were filled with rage as he clenched his fists so tightly that they creaked. With a frosty expression, he shouted angrily, Ji Ling. Don't be complacent. Sooner or later, I will take back everything I've lost. However, Ji Ling laughed even more arrogantly. When is sooner or later? Don't tell me you want to wait until I become the Sect Master's disciple and have limitless glory before coming to take revenge on me? At that time, I'll be able to kill you with a casual word. Ji Ling. You're courting death. Ji Tianqing could no longer hold back his anger and killing intent as he waved his fist towards Ji Ling. Chapter 124. Ji Tianqing's speed was as fast as the wind, and in the blink of an eye, he was in front of Ji Ling. His fists flickered with golden true essence, and with a sharp and domineering power, he ruthlessly smashed towards Ji Ling's face. Ji Ling was already prepared, and immediately retreated, jumping out of the pavilion. He dodged Ji Tianqing's attack and jumped onto the tree-lined path. With a mocking sneer on his face, he said, Ji Tianqing, you'll never be able to defeat me. In the past, now, and in the future, you will always be under my feet. I will let you know what despair is. Go to hell. Ji Tianqing angrily roared, and once again punched towards Ji Ling. The tree-lined path was somewhat narrow, and Ji Ling found it difficult to dodge his attack, so he used a palm technique to block. Tiger Leap Palm. Ji Ling circulated his true essence, and a powerful force burst out from his body, causing his clothes to flutter in the wind. Both of his palms shot out a violent force. Bang bang bang. In the blink of an eye, the two's fists and palms collided several times, producing a few muffled sounds. Although Ji Ling was at the 7th level of the True Essence realm, his true essence was not as powerful as Ji Tianqing's, and he was actually forced back 5 steps. Without waiting for him to stabilize his footing, Ji Tianqing once again punched out. Bang bang. Another few muffled sounds rang out, and Ji Ling blocked 3 punches with his palms, but Ji Tianqing's fist landed on his chest. He was once again forced back 5 steps, his face pale, and the corner of his mouth coughed out blood. Ji Ling. Who is more desperate? Ji Tianqing angrily roared, filled with killing intent, and once again rushed towards Ji Ling. Ji Ling's face was gloomy, and he silently used Tiger Leap Palm, desperately blocking his attacks. The two of them fought in the tree-lined path, their figures constantly twisting and turning, dazzling everyone's eyes. Every time their fists and palms collided, a sharp force would burst out, crushing the flowers and leaves on the side of the path. In a short 100 breaths of time, the two of them had exchanged more than 20 moves. Ji Tianqing, who was at the 6th level of the True Essence realm, was actually forcing Ji Ling to retreat step by step. His face was pale, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. But at this moment, a graceful figure suddenly appeared on the tree-lined path. She was Ji Ku, who had hurriedly rushed over. When she arrived at the pavilion, she saw Ji Tianqing and Ji's figures. Seeing the two of them fighting fiercely, her expression changed and she furrowed her brows. What's going on? Brother Tianqing asked me to come here. Why is royal uncle here too? Why are they fighting? Ji Ku murmured in confusion. She rushed to Ji Tianqing's side and shouted anxiously, Brother Tianqing, royal uncle, please stop. No matter what grudges you have, this is the sect. If you fight in private, you will be punished by the sect. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ling's expressions changed when they heard Ji Ku's voice. A sneer flashed across Ji Ling's eyes as she was secretly pleased with herself. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, was stunned. He turned to Ji Ku and asked in confusion, Ku, what are you doing here? Ji Ku was also stunned. She asked in confusion, Brother Tianqing, weren't you the one who sent me a letter and asked me to meet here? You also said in the letter that you had something to discuss with me, and that we would meet there. So I hurried over. Ji Tianqing frowned and realized that the situation was not good. No. Ku, I didn't send you a letter. You've been deceived. Ji Ku's eyes widened. After being stunned for a moment, she guessed that it must be Ji Ling's doing. However, just as Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku were confronting each other to verify the authenticity of the letter, Ji Ling had already rushed over to Ji Tianqing's side. Ji Ling had already taken the opportunity to rush in front of Ji Tianqing. She reached out and untied the belt around her waist. With a shake of her hand, she turned it into a soft sword and stabbed it at Ji Tianqing with a sinister smile. Ji Tianqing, prepare to die. Ji Ku had just turned to look at Ji Ling when she saw Ji Ling holding the soft sword in her hand and ruthlessly stabbing it at Ji Tianqing's chest. Brother Tianqing, be careful. At the critical moment, she subconsciously cried out to remind Ji Tianqing. However, by the time Ji Tianqing came back to his senses, it was too late for him to dodge. At the critical moment, Ji Ku stepped forward without hesitation and rushed in front of Ji Tianqing, using her body to block the sword. Chi! The soft sound of the blade piercing through clothes and flesh could be heard. Ji Ku's back was facing Ji Tianqing. A black blade pierced through her right shoulder and came out from her back. Dark red blood flowed out from the wound and dyed the clothes on her back red. Ji Tianqing never thought that Ji Ling would be so despicable and sinister as to use a soft sword to launch a sneak attack. What was even more unexpected was that at the moment of life and death, Ji Ku would not hesitate to sacrifice herself to save him. He was so angry that his eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. His heart also fiercely twitched a few times as he felt a sharp pain. Ku. Ji Tianqing cried out in alarm and immediately rushed towards Ji Ku, wanting to save her. However, Ji Ling's reaction was even faster. She had already pulled out her black soft sword and wrapped her arms around Ji Ku's neck, holding her hostage. Ji Ku's body was hit by the sword. Her face was as pale as paper and she had no strength to resist at all. Ji Ling dragged her and kept retreating. She placed the sword on her neck and shouted at Ji Tianqing with a ferocious expression, "Ji Tianqing. If you come any closer, I'll kill her with one strike." Ji Tianqing was worried about Ji Ku's safety. His heart was burning with anxiety and he did not dare to act rashly. He could only stop and stand 5 meters away from Ji Ling. His incomparable anger almost made him go berserk. His eyes were as red as blood as he roared at the top of his lungs, "Ji Ling. You bastard! Ku is your niece. How could you be so cruel to her? Your heart is so vicious that you're worse than a pig or a dog." Ji Ling grinned and sneered with a sinister expression, "Ji Tianqing, you're really ignorant and laughable. Born in the royal family, there has never been any kinship to speak of. If Ji Ku dies today, it will be because of you. She will die because of you." He shouted with a venomous tone and struck the back of Ji Ku's head with his palm, knocking her unconscious. Then, he dragged the unconscious Ji Ku and retreated. After 10 steps, he had retreated to the end of the tree-lined path. Behind him was a cliff. The jade sword peak was steep and straight. From afar, it looked like a giant sword standing on the ground. The cliff was more than 1,000 meters deep, and at the bottom of the cliff was the dense forest at the foot of the mountain. Ji Tianqing approached Ji Ling step by step and shouted with a stern voice, "Ji Ling. What are you doing? Let go of Ji Ku. I promise I won't kill you today." Ji Ling immediately sneered disdainfully, "You won't kill me? He. But I want to kill you. Otherwise, why do you think I deliberately tricked the two of you into coming here?" "What?" Ji Tianqing immediately glared angrily, his entire body bursting with killing intent. "Ku is innocent. You won't even let her go?" Ji Ling sneered with a sinister expression, "She died for you. You were the one who killed her." With that, he ruthlessly slapped Ji Ku's back and pushed him down the cliff. Chapter 125. Ji Tianqing witnessed Ji Ku being pushed off the cliff and falling down 1,000 meters. His eyes turned red with anger. He glared at Ji Ling, his chest almost bursting with anger and killing intent. At that moment, the unparalleled anger and killing intent made him lose all reason, turning him into an enraged beast. "Ji Ling. You bastard. I'm going to kill you." Ji Tianqing roared and unleashed all of his strength, punching towards Ji Ling, bang, 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 bang. He instantly struck out 4 golden fist shadows, each of which had the power to shatter stone. Ji Ling's expression was grave as he counterattacked with his sword, slashing out black sword shadows that filled the sky, aiming at Ji Tianqing's vital points. The fist shadows and black sword shadows collided, producing a series of muffled sounds. Ji Tianqing was not a profound comprehension expert after all, so he could not use his true essence to condense fist or sword light. A fist made of flesh and blood, even if it contained the power of true origin, would find it difficult to block weapons. He was forced to continuously retreat, and after exchanging a few blows with Ji Ling, he was forced to retreat to the pavilion. Hatred and killing intent made him no longer have any scruples. He immediately activated his sword chi and used the ultimate move of the Flying Star sword art. Thousand Feather Blade. Ji Tianqing activated 6 golden sword chi and stabbed at Ji Ling as fast as lightning. In a breath, the 6 sword chi had stabbed over 100 times. The area 3 meters around Ji Ling was covered with golden light, which was extremely dazzling. However, he was suffering unspeakably. He desperately waved his sword to block the sword chi, but he could only block half of the attacks. In the blink of an eye, he was stabbed more than 40 times by the sword chi. His green robe became tattered and became a pile of rags. Although he had the protection of the golden silk armor, which blocked most of the sword chi, his legs were still injured. However, his legs and arms were still pierced a few times by the sword chi, leaving a few bloody holes where blood kept flowing out. The 6 sword chi were still stabbing at an extremely fast speed, and Ji Ling was about to be pierced into a hornet's nest. At the critical moment, a tall and burly young man in a white robe rushed out from the woods beside the path. He brandished his sword and attacked Ji Tianqing. The white-robed youth was Jian Yu. His face was still pale, and his legs were not as nimble as before. However, he glared at Ji Tianqing with a murderous look in his eyes and a ferocious expression on his face. Ji Tianqing. Today is the day you die. Jian Yu let out a furious roar and rushed towards Ji Tianqing like a gust of wind. Then, he brandished his sword and sent out 9 dark yellow sword lights. Damned beast, you actually have helpers. Ji Tianqing's expression immediately changed. He hurriedly controlled the 6 sword chis to fly back to his side to block Jian Yu's attack. The golden sword chi collided with the 9 sword lights, producing a series of clanging sounds. Ji Tianqing saw Jian Yu's figure clearly and recognized the swordsmanship he used. His expression changed immediately. It's you. Are you the man in black who tried to assassinate me? You are Jian Yu. Jian Yu's identity was exposed, but he did not panic in the slightest. His eyes were filled with hatred as he sneered, "Hee hee. You only know now. Don't you think it's too late? You will not be able to escape today. You will die without a doubt." As soon as he finished speaking, Jian Yu once again brandished his sword and attacked Ji Tianqing. Ji Ling also rushed over and slashed out a few sword lights with her sword. She joined forces with Jian Yu to attack. Ji Tianqing was attacked from the left and right by the 2 of them, but he did not panic in the slightest. He controlled the 6 sword chis to assassinate Jian Yu and Ji Ling respectively. In 3 breaths of time, he stabbed out 300 times. The sword lights that Jian Yu and Ji Ling released were instantly shattered by the golden sword chi. The 2 of them were also forced to retreat. A few more bloody holes appeared on their bodies. Their expressions were extremely ugly. Damn it! How can Ji Tianqing be so strong? What kind of sword technique is this? It can actually suppress the 2 of us. As Jian Yu and Ji Ling continued to retreat, their hearts became heavier and heavier. They originally thought that they would be able to kill Ji Tianqing by joining forces. However, they did not expect that Ji Tianqing's combat strength would be so strong. The sword technique he used was unfathomable. The 2 of them were actually beaten back by Ji Tianqing. It was simply unbelievable. Finally, the 1,000-feather blade was completed. A ruthless cold light flashed in Ji Tianqing's eyes as he used the Gale Lightning Strike again. Gale Lightning Strike. He let out a low shout and controlled the 6 sword chis. They merged into 2 huge sword chis that were half a meter long and ruthlessly attacked Jian Yu. The 2 sword chis lit up with a dazzling cold light and swept up a violent hurricane. It caused the trees on both sides of the path to sway and the flowers and plants to be crushed. The golden sword chis mixed with the violent hurricane. It was like a half a meter long lightning bolt that ruthlessly struck Jian Yu. Bang! Jian Yu's face was aghast as he waved his sword to block, but it was useless. With a muffled sound, the sword in his hand was sent flying. He was also sent flying 3 meters away and fell into the forest by the side of the road. He struggled a few times in the forest but was unable to get up. He only felt a tingling pain all over his body and dark red blood kept flowing out of his mouth. After Ji Tianqing heavily injured Jian Yu with one move, he no longer paid attention to him and rushed towards Ji Ling like a gust of wind. Ji Ling! You bastard! I will kill you to pay for Ku's life. Ji Tianqing roared as if he had gone mad. He once again activated the sword cheese and attacked Ji Ling. Ji Ling saw with his own eyes that Jian Yu was sent flying by a single move. He spat out blood as he lay in the forest and did not crawl out for a long time. He was already pale with fright. When he saw Ji Tianqing controlling the sword cheese to attack him again, how could he still have the courage to resist? At this moment, he could only desperately retreat. He was extremely anxious as he shouted in his heart, I miscalculated. I didn't expect that bastard Ji Tianqing to be so strong. Brother Lu, you must come as soon as possible. If you don't come, you can only collect this king's corpse. At this moment, 2 streaks of sword cheese came from the left and right. They shone with a dazzling cold light and swept up a violent hurricane as they ruthlessly slashed down. Bang! The sword light and the hurricane mixed together and slashed Ji Ling. It was like a combination of wind and lightning, knocking him to the ground on the spot. He rolled back more than 10 times before stopping. He lay on the edge of the cliff and spat out a large mouthful of blood. He was in an extremely sorry state. Even though he had the protection of the golden silk armor, he was still seriously injured by the wind and lightning and could not get up for a while. Seeing Ji Tianqing walking over with a murderous aura, Ji Ling was immediately filled with despair. However, he suddenly saw Lu Mingyang rushing over with a black-robed man on the path behind Ji Tianqing. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief and pretended to be angry as he shouted, Ji Tianqing. You actually want to publicly kill a fellow disciple for your own personal grudge. You are simply guilty of a heinous crime. Ji Tianqing immediately stopped in his tracks, his brows tightly knitted together. He subconsciously turned his head and looked behind him. He saw Lu Mingyang and a middle-aged man in a black robe. Although he didn't know the black-robed man, he knew very well that he was a deacon of the Sky Pillar sect. Sure enough, Lu Mingyang hurriedly rushed to the scene. When he saw Ji Ling covered in blood, he said with righteous indignation, Deacon, look. Ji Tianqing is so cruel. He actually dared to do such a vicious thing to a fellow disciple in the sect. Chapter 126. Ji Tianqing had a bad premonition when he saw Lu Mingyang appear with the black deacon. He immediately understood that this was all part of Ji Ling's scheme. He and Ji Ku were both tricked by Ji Ling, and Jian Yu and Lu Mingyang were her accomplices. At this moment, the black deacon walked to the middle of the field and shouted angrily, Stop! The disciplinary deacon is here. Don't you dare be so arrogant. If the disciplinary deacon had come a moment later, Ji Tianqing would have killed Ji Ling. However, since the disciplinary deacon was here, he no longer had the chance to kill Ji Ling and could only reluctantly stop. Ji Ling sneered in her heart but pretended to be on the verge of death. She reported to the disciplinary deacon, Deacon, you came at the right time. Ji Tianqing, that bastard, wanted to kill me. Deacon, you must seek justice for me. The disciplinary deacon looked at Ji Ling and asked in a low voice, What's going on? Why are you here and why are you killing each other? Without waiting for Ji Tianqing to explain, Ji Ling spoke first, Deacon, this is what happened. Ji Tianqing and I both came from Qingyun Kingdom and we had a grudge in the secular world. After we entered the sect, we both entered the storm courtyard. He always wanted to take revenge on me but never had the chance. Coincidentally, I have a niece called Ji Ku who was cultivating in the White Dew courtyard. Ji Tianqing tricked her to come here and used her as a hostage to force me to submit to him. After I heard the news, I brought Senior Jian Yu to save Ji Ku. I didn't expect that. Ji Tianqing, that evil bastard, would injure Ji Ku and push her down the cliff. After the matter was exposed, he even wanted to kill me and Jian Yu. Fortunately, Deacon, you came in time. Otherwise, we would be dead. Ji Tianqing was so angry that he was about to go crazy. His body emitted a thick murderous intent as he stared at Ji Ling. Ji Ling. You despicable bastard. You're worse than a pig or a dog. You clearly tricked me and Ji Ku into coming here. You were the one who personally pushed Ji Ku off the cliff. How dare you slander me and slander me? How can there be such a vicious and shameless bastard in this world? Ji Ling sneered and explained, Ji Tianqing, you're really funny. Ji Ku is my niece. I've always doted on her. How could I push her off the cliff? Even if you want to quibble and slander me, please use your brain. Hearing Ji Tianqing's words, the disciplinary deacon frowned and gloomily looked at Ji Tianqing. Just then, Jian Yu crawled out of the woods. He was covered in blood and mud, looking as miserable as Ji Ling. When he saw the disciplinary deacon, it was as if he had seen his savior. He quickly endured his injuries and bowed, Disciple Jian Yu greets deacon. I can testify for Ji Ling. After Ji Ling received the news, he invited me to come to Jade Sword Peak to save his niece. Unfortunately, when we arrived, we saw Ji Tianqing pushing Ji Ku off the cliff. We were so angry that we wanted to capture Ji Tianqing and hand him over to the sect for punishment. I didn't expect Ji Tianqing to be so strong. He actually wanted to kill us to silence us and cover up the evidence. Deacon, you saw it with your own eyes when you came just now. Everything this disciple said is true. At this moment, Lu Mingyang hurriedly added, Deacon, I can also testify for Ji Ling. Ji Tianqing has a personal grudge with him and has always been looking for an opportunity to take revenge on him. Moreover, Ji Tianqing stole a spirit fruit from the spiritual herbal garden on the second day after entering the Fengyun courtyard. He was punished by Deacon Han of the Fengyun courtyard. A despicable and sinister person like Ji Tianqing is simply a disgrace to our sect. Now that he has committed such a heinous crime, I hope Deacon will punish him severely. Ji Ling, Jian Yu, and Lu Mingyang were in cahoots. They all insisted that Ji Tianqing killed Ji Ku and wanted to silence him. Ji Tianqing was so angry that he wanted to go berserk, but he couldn't defend himself. He had no evidence and no one to testify for him. Of course, the disciplinary deacon wouldn't believe him. After a while, the disciplinary deacon asked about the situation and ordered in a deep voice, Ji Tianqing, Ji Ling, and Jian Yu, this matter is very serious. I will definitely investigate it thoroughly. Before the investigation is completed, the three of you have to follow me back to the disciplinary hall to await your punishment. In addition, I will immediately send orders to send people to search for Ji Ku at the bottom of the cliff. After that, the disciplinary deacon led everyone away from Jade Sword Peak and returned to the disciplinary hall at the peak of towering Sky Peak. Ji Tianqing, Ji Ling, and Jian Yu were locked up in 3 quiet rooms in the discipline hall, awaiting the discipline hall's investigation and judgment. Not only that, but the disciplinary hall also sent people to search for Ji Ku's whereabouts at the foot of Jade Sword Peak. Half a day quickly passed. In the disciplinary hall's 3rd quiet room, Ji Tianqing was sitting in a corner, expressionlessly looking up at the small window on the wall. This quiet room was only 3 meters in radius. There was nothing in the room, not even a chair. The floor and walls were all made of dark brown boulders, and there was an iron window the size of a human head on the wall. Through the iron window, one could only see a palm-sized piece of sky outside. Night had already fallen, and the sky outside the window was gloomy. Ji Tianqing had been sitting in the cold corner for an entire afternoon. His mood had long since changed from anger and irritation to indifference and helplessness. He knew the truth of the matter and had repeatedly told the disciplinary deacon. However, the Sky Pillar sect's rules were strict, and the disciplinary deacon wouldn't believe his one-sided story. Before the matter was thoroughly investigated, the only thing he could do was obediently stay in the quiet room and wait for the disciplinary hall's judgment. He had long since made up his mind that after this matter was over, he would find an opportunity to kill Ji Ling and take revenge. At this moment, he was most worried about Ji Ku, but there was nothing he could do. He could only silently pray for Ji Ku. Ku, nothing must happen to you. You must not die. I will definitely clear your name and avenge you by killing Ji Ling. I swear. The quiet room was deathly silent, and time seemed to pass very slowly. After an unknown period of time, someone opened the door to the quiet room. A black-robed deacon walked into the room and looked at Ji Tianqing with an indifferent expression. He said in a deep voice, "Ji Tianqing, come out." Ji Tianqing immediately stood up and anxiously asked, "Sir Deacon, have you found Ji Ku? How is she?" The deacon glanced at him and coldly said, "Ji Ku isn't dead, but she's on the verge of death and unconscious." Ji Tianqing finally let out a sigh of relief and muttered, "It's good that she's not dead. I knew Ku was lucky and wouldn't die like this. Come with me." The deacon ordered in a deep voice. "Where to?" Ji Tianqing subconsciously asked, "Has the disciplinary hall finished their investigation and wants to let me out?" The deacon looked at him expressionlessly and said in a deep voice, "The matter hasn't been completely investigated, but it's basically confirmed that you murdered your fellow disciples. However, we still need to wait for Ji Ku to wake up before we can make a final conclusion. Before Ji Ku wakes up, the disciplinary hall has decided to imprison you in the dark wind cave in the back mountain. You should properly reflect on your actions." "What? That's impossible." Ji Tianqing immediately said anxiously, "It was clearly Ji Ling who plotted against me and Ji Ku. Ji Ku and I are good friends. How could I harm her?" "Cut the crap." The deacon coldly said, "You don't have any evidence to prove your innocence, so you must abide by the disciplinary hall's investigation. Come with me to the dark wind cave now." Chapter 127. The night was dark and the wind was howling. Ji Tianqing was escorted by the black deacon to the back of the mountain and into a dark cave. The cave was slanted and extended underground. It was deep and winding. Every 30 meters, there was a stone lamp on both sides of the cave wall that was lit. The stone lamp was an ancient origin artifact. It was lit by a formation, but the light was weak. The dim yellow light could not illuminate the cave, so Ji Tianqing could not see what was going on inside the cave. 15 minutes later, the black deacon escorted him into the deepest part of the cave. In front of him was a dark cliff. Layers of brown rocks could be seen at the bottom of the cliff. To the left of the cliff was a dark and cold stone room. Ji Tianqing was imprisoned in this stone room. Before leaving, the black deacon closed the heavy black iron door and locked it with a large chain. "Ji Tianqing, stay in the dark wind cave and reflect on your mistakes. Don't even think about escaping. If you dare to escape, you will be executed on the spot when we catch you." After saying this, the black deacon turned and left. His figure quickly disappeared into the darkness. Ji Tianqing stood in the cold stone room. His hands gripped the iron bars of the black iron door. He shouted unwillingly, "Deacon, I have been framed. As long as you save Ji Ku, the truth will be revealed." However, the black deacon walked further and further away, completely ignoring him. After a long time, the dark wind cave fell into a dead silence. Ji Tianqing let go of his hands and sat on the stone bench in a daze. There were only two things in the dark and cold stone room. There was an ancient stone lamp on the wall and a rough stone bench in the corner. Other than that, there was nothing else. The ground was covered in dust. Footprints were left behind when one stepped on it. No one knew how long it had been since someone was locked in this stone room. Ji Tianqing did not know how long he would be locked in here. Maybe 2 or 3 days. Or 2 or 3 months. The key to determining how long he would be locked up was when Ji Ku would wake up. However, Ji Ku was first stabbed by Ji Ling, then knocked unconscious and pushed off the cliff. It was already a blessing from the heavens that she didn't die after falling off the cliff. Ji Tianqing found it hard to imagine how serious her injuries were and when she would wake up. Wait. He could only wait bitterly. This stone chamber was located deep underground. Other than the faint light from the stone lantern, he could never see the sky outside. During his imprisonment, only darkness accompanied him. At the bottom of the cliff not far from the stone chamber, endless cold wind was blowing, constantly pouring into the stone chamber. Ji Tianqing had only been sitting on the stone bench for an hour when he was chilled by the bone-chilling cold wind and shivered all over. Darkness, coldness, loneliness, and helplessness surrounded him. Boundless rage and killing intent silently rose in his heart once more. Damn Ji Ling! You bastard! Bastard! When I see the light of day again, I will tear you to pieces and burn your bones to ashes. Ji Tianqing clenched his fists, his fingers cracking as he roared at the top of his lungs. It was the first time in his life that he hated someone so much. It was also the first time he saw someone so despicable and sinister, so deranged to such an extent. Even when he was betrayed and humiliated by Ling Yunfei, the anger and killing intent in his heart were not as turbulent as now. Time passed quietly. After an unknown period of time, Ji Tianqing curled up on the stone bench in the corner. His face was blue from the cold wind, and his entire body was stinging with pain. He knew that he could not sit there any longer. This cave was called Dark Wind Cave, and it was specially used to imprison disciples who violated the sect's rules. Naturally, it was used as a punishment. The endless cold wind was his punishment. No. I have to think of a way to resist the cold wind. If I continue to sit here like this, my flesh and blood will definitely freeze and my meridians will die. The only way Ji Tianqing could think of was to circulate his energy to resist the cold. Fortunately, he had an abundance of vital essence. After the vital essence circulated throughout his body and spread to his limbs and bones, the stinging pain in his flesh and meridians lessened by a lot. This method was indeed effective. Ji Tianqing's emotions calmed down slightly. He abandoned the distracting thoughts in his heart and sat cross-legged on the ground to circulate his energy to cultivate. He followed the third level of the path of the sword and mobilized the vital essence in his body to flow through the 9 main meridians. He wanted to refine the 9 meridians into sword veins. 12 hours had passed, and his power was slowly increasing. His physical body had also adapted to the cold wind that constantly poured into the stone room. An entire day had passed, and the hunger in his stomach made him restless. He had to stop his cultivation and open the 100 treasures brocade pouch to look for food. Fortunately, when the stinky old man detained Xian Yu and the black dragon sword, he did not take away the 100 treasures brocade pouch and returned it to him. He used to store a lot of food and fruits in the 100 treasures brocade pouch for the little ice fox, Xian Yu. After casually eating some fruits and food, his hunger was alleviated, and he started to circulate his energy to cultivate again. Unknowingly, 5 days had passed. In these 5 days, the cave was silent and gloomy. No one had come. Other than Ji Tianqing himself, he did not even see a shadow. He had been circulating his energy to cultivate day and night. When he was hungry, he would look for food in the 100 treasures brocade pouch. Unfortunately, after 5 days of consumption, the little food in the 100 treasures brocade pouch was finally finished. Under the unbearable hunger, Ji Tianqing could only think of another way. He remembered that there were many elixirs in the 100 treasures brocade pouch, so he took out some elixirs and consumed them. He circulated his energy to refine the elixirs and replenish his energy. Experts of the Tongxian realm can abstain from eating. Even if they don't eat a grain of rice for 10 days to half a month, it won't affect them much. Although I'm only at the 6th level of the true energy realm, I can rely on these elixirs to maintain my vital essence and practice abstaining from eating. Abstaining from eating meant that experts of the martial way did not eat and only relied on absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth to maintain their energy. This was something only experts of the Tongxian realm could do. The Tongxian realm was the realm where one could understand the heavens and earth and communicate with the underworld. Martial artists of this realm could transform their strong willpower into spiritual consciousness and communicate with the yuan qi of heaven and earth. They could absorb the yuan qi like water and convert it into their own vital essence. As long as their vital essence was abundant, a Tongxian realm martial artist would not need to eat or drink and still possess great strength. Ji Tianqing had never thought of deliberately practicing abstaining from eating. He wanted to wait until he reached the Tongxian realm and let nature take its course. However, he was in a difficult situation now and had to rely on his strong willpower and endurance to practice abstaining from eating. Unknowingly, another 5 days had passed. In these 5 days, Ji Tianqing only relied on a few elixirs to maintain his vital essence and his strong willpower to endure the hunger. He had actually achieved the initial stage of abstaining from eating. Moreover, he had cultivated in the stone room for 10 days and had successfully refined his first main meridian into a sword meridian. His strength had also increased. Although he had made some progress in the cultivation of the sword heart, he was not happy at all. Instead, he was filled with worry. It's been 10 days. Why hasn't anyone come to find me? Could it be that Ku has been unconscious and hasn't woken up yet? Chapter 128. Ji Tianqing's heart was filled with worry, and his heart was burning with anxiety. He was fine being locked up for 10 days, but he was more worried that Ji Ku still hadn't woken up after 10 days. Could something have happened to him? At the thought of this, he became restless and paced back and forth in the stone room. At this moment, he didn't dare to extravagantly hope that the commandment hall would let him leave Dark Wind Cave once the truth was out. He only hoped that someone would come and tell him some news about Ji Ku. At the very least, it would give him peace of mind. However, no one came to Dark Wind Cave for 10 whole days. Who would come to see him and give him news? Ji Tianqing sat on the stone bench, his thoughts in a mess. After about 4 hours, the sound of light footsteps suddenly came from the dark cave. Ji Tianqing thought that he had misheard or was hallucinating. He was still sitting on the stone bench, deep in thought with a frown. After 100 breaths, the footsteps got closer and clearer. It was only now that Ji Tianqing was finally sure that he hadn't misheard. Someone had really come. He stood up with a swish and held the iron bars of the black iron door with both hands, trying his best to look into the cave. He saw a slim figure in a long white dress with waist-length hair slowly walking out of the darkness. When she came to the door of the stone room, Ji Tianqing was shocked when he saw her face clearly. "Why are you here? Eldest senior sister, why are you here?" Ji Tianqing thought that the person who came was the commandment hall's deacon, but he didn't expect that the person who came was Yun Yao. Yun Yao stood outside the stone room, only separated from him by a black iron door. She looked at him calmly. Seeing that his face was a little haggard and his body was a little haggard, Yun Yao couldn't help but frown slightly, as if she couldn't bear to see him like this. After a moment of silence, she said calmly, "I know that after that incident, you must be angry and irritable being locked up here. That's why I waited until today to see you. I believe that you've calmed down." Ji Tianqing nodded as a bitter smile appeared on his face. "Yes, I was indeed very angry and irritable a few days ago. But since it has already happened, there's nothing I can do no matter how angry I am. There's nothing I can do if I don't calm down. After a pause, he stared into Yunyao's eyes and asked in a serious tone, "Eldest senior sister, if I said that Ji Ku was pushed off the cliff by Ji Ling and that I was wrongly accused, would you believe me?" Yunyao nodded without hesitation and said gently, "I believe you. If I didn't believe you, I wouldn't have come to see you." Ji Tianqing's tense heart suddenly relaxed, and his mood also relaxed a lot. He laughed self-deprecatingly and said to himself, "Yes, I didn't think of that." Yunyao then said gently, "Don't think about running away. Just wait here for the time being. The truth will come to light eventually." Although the commandment hall is strict and merciless, causing the disciples in the sect to be afraid, the commandment hall has always been fair and impartial. They won't wrongly accuse a good person. Ji Tianqing nodded and asked worriedly, "Eldest senior sister, how's Kuku?" Yunyao frowned slightly and said in a serious tone, "Ji Ku's injuries are too serious. It's already a blessing that he's still alive. She's been unconscious. The elders in the sect are trying to find a way to save her, but they don't know when she'll wake up." Ji Tianqing was even more worried. He gripped the bars of the iron door tightly and shouted with grief and indignation, "Damn Ji Ling! This vicious bastard! I'll kill him sooner or later." Yunyao shook her head with a complicated expression. "Junior brother Tianqing, let me give you a piece of advice. Don't fight with Ji Ling. You can't beat him." "Why?" Ji Tianqing asked unwillingly, "Could it be that I can only watch him get away with it and not take revenge?" Yunyao sighed heavily, "Junior brother Tianqing, Ji Ling is the person our sect is looking for. The sect leader thinks highly of him." Hearing this, Ji Tianqing suddenly remembered what Ji Ling had said to him with a smug expression on his face that day on Jade Sword Peak. "Eldest senior sister, that day on Jade Sword Peak, Ji Ling personally told me that he was the person our sect had been painstakingly looking for. The sect leader wanted to nurture him with all his might and even wanted to take him in as a direct disciple. Could it be because he has the Xian sword bloodline?" Yunyao was silent for a while before nodding to Ji Tianqing, "Yes." He, Ji Tianqing's body trembled. Suddenly, he sneered with a strange expression. His eyes surged with an incomparably vicious glint. "Ha ha ha. As expected, the heavens are playing tricks on me." In the end, the sneer had turned into a wild laughter. That wild laughter was filled with anger and unwillingness, as well as a strong sense of ridicule. When Yunyao saw Ji Tianqing's crazy appearance, she slightly frowned, and felt an inexplicable pain in her heart. This was because she could clearly feel that Ji Tianqing's wild laughter contained a strong sense of sorrow. After a long while, the wild laughter stopped. Ji Tianqing stared at Yunyao with a burning gaze, and asked in a low voice, "Eldest senior sister, if I tell you that the Xian sword bloodline was originally my innate bloodline, and that Ji Ling set up a sinister scheme and used the god-seizing orb to steal my life's cultivation and Xian sword bloodline, would you? Would you believe me?" He knew how shocking these words were, and how absurd they sounded to others. He was even more clear that if other disciples were to hear these words, they would probably treat him as a lunatic who had lost his mind. However, he didn't know why, but when faced with Yunyao's beautiful face and those clear eyes that seemed to be able to see through one's heart, he couldn't help but want to tell the truth. Moreover, he was also looking forward to seeing Yunyao's reaction. Yunyao was stunned for a moment. Her clear and deep eyes suddenly widened, and only returned to normal after a while. A hint of shock and disbelief appeared on her beautiful face. However, she remained silent and stared at Ji Tianqing's eyes for a long time before nodding solemnly. "I believe you." Ji Tianqing's body trembled slightly, and an extremely complicated feeling flashed through his heart, but he also felt an inexplicable sense of relief. He revealed a face full of smiles, a very clean and sincere smile. When he was being wronged, when he was in prison, there was actually someone who believed in him. Moreover, this person was the #1 genius of the Tianshan region, Yunyao, who was like a fairy from the 9 heavens. How could he not be filled with relief? Yunyao pondered for a moment, then said to him with a serious expression, "Junior brother Tianqing, although this news is very shocking, what the sect leader needs is only the Xian sword bloodline. The sect leader doesn't care about Ji Ling's background at all, nor does he care about how he obtained the Xian sword bloodline. Do you understand?" The smile on Ji Tianqing's face suddenly disappeared. After a moment of silence, he said with a bitter smile, "I understand. Even if I tell the sect leader this news, it won't affect Ji Ling's future, right?" Yunyao didn't reply, but she tacitly agreed. "All right, I should go." She nodded at Ji Tianqing and reminded him again, "Don't give up, wait for the results in peace." With that, she turned around and left. Ji Tianqing watched as her slim back was gradually swallowed by the darkness. After hesitating for a moment, he asked loudly, "Senior sister, I want to ask you one last question. What I said just now, if it was anyone else, they might not believe it. Why are you willing to believe me?" Yunyao stopped in her tracks, but she didn't turn around. After a moment of silence, she said in a calm voice, "Because I went to the Qingyun kingdom, and after seeing you a few times, I could feel that you are different from the rest. In fact, I always felt that you were the person the sect was looking for." Chapter 129. Before Yunyao left, she gave Ji Tianqing 2 Heaven Heart elixirs. The Heaven Heart elixir was a black-grade high-grade elixir, a rare cultivation elixir. With these 2 elixirs, not only could Ji Tianqing continue his anedia for half a month, but his cultivation would also increase greatly. He held the 2 elixirs in his hands and stood at the entrance of the stone room for a long time. Although the cave was still dark and the cold wind was still bone-chilling, he did not feel lonely. Yunyao came to visit him and was willing to believe in him. To him, this was a great comfort and encouragement. His heart had truly calmed down. Even if he had to endure the loneliness and cold, he was no longer so lonely and helpless. After a long time, he returned to the corner and sat down. He took a blood spirit elixir and continued to cultivate. 2 days passed quickly. Ji Tianqing had refined the blood spirit elixir and his cultivation had more than doubled. He was not far from the 7th level of the true energy realm. Moreover, he had achieved a small success in his anedia cultivation. Although he had not eaten or drunk for 7 days, he did not feel hungry. Moreover, his true energy was flowing more easily and smoothly, reaching a point where he could do as he pleased. Late at night, Ji Tianqing was meditating and cultivating in the corner of the cave. Suddenly, he vaguely heard a rustling sound coming from the bottom of the cliff not far away. He thought it was the sound of the wind from the bottom of the cliff and did not pay much attention to it. However, after a while, the sound of rocks rolling down the cliff came from the bottom of the cliff. Ji Tianqing heard it clearly and was immediately awakened. "I'm the only one in this cave. The cliff is so deep that I can't see the bottom. How could there be movement? Could there be some monster or ferocious beast climbing up from the bottom of the cliff?" In the darkness, he did not understand his surroundings and could not help but think of many things. He tiptoed to the side of the iron door and pressed his face against the iron railing, trying his best to look in the direction of the cliff. The cliff 10 meters away was still pitch black, and cold winds were constantly gushing out of it. Ji Tianqing stood motionless by the door and stared at the cliff with wide eyes, silently observing. Ordinary people might not be able to see through the darkness, but he was an expert of the 6th level of the true energy realm. His eyesight was 10 times better than ordinary people. He focused his attention on the cliff and could see the lines of the rock layer on the edge of the cliff. About 10 breaths later, a hand suddenly stretched out from the bottom of the silent cliff. It was a palm that was wider than a normal person's, and its skin was light purple. Although the hand looked slender and looked like a woman's hand, it was indeed a little too big. It was even bigger than Ji Tianqing's palm. What is it? Ji Tianqing was shocked. His whole body tensed up, but he held his breath and didn't make a sound. The next moment, a slender figure in a black robe flew out from the bottom of the cliff and landed silently at the edge of the cliff. Even though the robe worn by that person was rather loose and covered 90% of his body, the robe was still quite large. However, the figure under the black robe was tall and slender. Moreover, it was curvaceous. It was obviously a woman. However, the woman's height was astonishing. She was half a head taller than Ji Tianqing, at least 1.9 meters. The skin on her hands and neck was also light purple. It looked a little weird. Ji Tianqing frowned and muttered to himself, "Why is this woman so tall? And her skin is light purple? Could it be that he's sick? No. Who is she? Why did she climb out from the bottom of the cliff?" Just as he was filled with doubts and secretly observing the woman in the black robe, the woman in the black robe sensed his breath and suddenly turned to look at the door of the stone room. Ji Tianqing didn't have time to retreat before he was discovered by the woman in the black robe. Swoosh! A black shadow flashed. The woman in the black robe was like a wisp of black smoke. In an instant, she crossed the distance of 10 meters and appeared at the door of the stone room. She stood outside the iron door, half a meter away from Ji Tianqing. There was only one iron door between them. At such a close distance, Ji Tianqing immediately saw that the woman in the black robe was wearing a cold iron mask. Under the mask, there was a pair of big eyes. The pupils were dark red like blood and emitted a cold air of death. Tall body, weird skin color, and blood-red eyes. Is she a member of the alien tribe? Suddenly, this thought flashed through Ji Tianqing's mind. He was full of shock. At the same time, the woman in the black robe silently stretched out her right hand and quickly grabbed Ji Tianqing's forehead. In the center of her wide palm, there was a dark red blood light, which condensed into a blood hand the size of a wash basin. Ji Tianqing was shocked. Without hesitation, he took 5 steps back and barely dodged the bloody hand's grasp. Bang! The huge dark red bloody hand slammed into the iron bars of the black iron door with a dull thud. The black iron bars were as thick as a child's arm. The material of the bars was comparable to a top-grade Xian weapon and was very tough. However, Ji Tianqing saw with his own eyes that the 3 black iron railings were actually bent and twisted by the dark red bloody hand, as if they were ass. His eyes widened and his eyebrows twitched. He was shocked. Oh my God! This woman's strength is so terrifying. She has probably surpassed the mystic comprehending realm and reached the primal core realm. When the woman in the black robe attacked, he clearly felt the aura of the woman in the black robe. Her aura was not inferior to Yun Yao's. Luckily, he retreated in time. If he was a second later, his head would have been crushed by the woman in the black robe's bloody hand. Who are you? Why do you want to kill me? Ji Tianqing retreated to the corner of the stone room, 8 meters away from the woman in the black robe, and asked with a face full of anger. The woman in the black robe stared at him with her dark red eyes, revealing a cold murderous intent. She said in a low voice, "I thought there was no one here. I didn't expect a flea like you to be here. Consider yourself pitiful. I have to kill you. I can't reveal my whereabouts." The woman in the black robe spoke in the human language, but her accent was awkward and awkward. It sounded weird. Ji Tianqing was even more certain that the woman in the black robe was a member of the alien tribe. He stared coldly at the woman in the black robe and said in a low voice, "Woman, you are really vicious. I don't even know you, and I have no grudges with you. You want to kill me? No matter where you are from or where you are going, it has nothing to do with me." His meaning was clear. No matter who the woman in the black robe was or what she was planning to do in the dark wind cave, it had nothing to do with him. As long as the woman in the black robe wasn't very cruel and vicious, she should have turned around and left after hearing what he said. Ji Tianqing said that because he had no other choice. The woman in the black robe was too powerful. He had no chance of winning, so he could only swallow his anger. However, he underestimated the woman in the black robe's cruelty. "Huh, since you saw me, you deserve to die." The woman in the black robe laughed coldly. She suddenly turned into a cloud of black fog, passed through the black iron door, and entered the stone room. Her scarlet eyes revealed a cold murderous intent. She reached out her bloody hand again and grabbed at Ji Tianqing's head. At the critical moment, Ji Tianqing's nerves tensed up, and he burst out with all his strength. Wind Thunder Strike. He instantly activated 2 half-meter-long golden sword chi, and slashed at the woman in the black robe from the left and right. The golden sword chi mixed with the violent hurricane, and turned into a half-meter-long lightning bolt, and slashed at the woman in the black robe. Bang! The lightning bolt was blocked by the bloody hand, and a muffled sound was heard. Chapter 130. The Gale Thunder Strike was Ji Tianqing's most powerful move. With this move, he could severely injure Jianyu, who was at the mystic comprehending state. However, the dark golden lightning was shattered by the bloody hand and dissipated instantly. The huge bloody hand was unscathed and grabbed his head at lightning speed. The black-robed woman was too powerful. She was so powerful that Ji Tianqing felt hopeless. He had no chance to fight back. Seeing that the Gale Thunder Strike was broken, he jumped 5 meters to the left without hesitation and tried his best to avoid the bloody hand. Bam! The black-robed woman's bloody hand hit the dark brown wall and left a huge handprint on the wall. Countless pieces of broken stone splattered everywhere. Humph! Damned flea, still trying to dodge? The black-robed woman sneered disdainfully. She waved her 2 huge bloody hands and grabbed at Ji Tianqing from both sides. Ji Tianqing tried his best to escape. He dashed left and right in the stone room, looking very pathetic. The black-robed woman's bloody hands missed and slapped the stone wall repeatedly. Bam! 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 They left a few huge handprints. The entire stone room shook. Cracks appeared on the stone wall and countless pieces of broken stone splattered everywhere. Unfortunately, the stone room was too small and there was no room to maneuver. Ji Tianqing tried his best to dodge the 4th attack, but in the end, he was unable to dodge the 5th attack from Blood Hand. Bam! Amidst the muffled sound, he was hit on the back by the huge bloody hand. He was immediately sent flying and crashed into the stone wall. He spat out a mouthful of blood and fell into the corner of the wall. He was exhausted and his eyes were closed. He had been seriously injured and had fainted. The black-robed woman walked to his side. Her eyes flashed with disdain. She raised her hand, and the huge bloody hand that contained an incomparably violent power fiercely slammed towards Ji Tianqing's chest. If this palm hit, Ji Tianqing would definitely be smashed into meat paste. There was no way he could survive. Bam! With a muffled sound, the huge bloody hand print hit Ji Tianqing's chest. However, he spat out a stream of blood, but his body did not change shape. The ice hornless armor he was wearing had blocked 80% of the blood hand's power at the critical moment, allowing him to survive. However, the black-robed woman frowned and glanced at the ice dragon armor under his green robe. Her eyes flashed with a mocking sneer. She once again raised her palm and unleashed a gigantic blood hand, slapping towards Ji Tianqing's head. Without the protection of the ice hornless armor, his head was about to be smashed into pieces. At this critical moment, a black light suddenly burst out from Ji Tianqing's dantian. The black light contained an icy aura of death. It instantly formed a huge black hole and enveloped the black-robed woman. The black-robed woman was caught off guard and was immediately stunned. In the blink of an eye, her huge bloody hand was swallowed by the black hole. All the energy in her body was quickly sucked away and poured into the black hole like a flood. The mysterious and powerful devouring power wrapped around her tightly, making it difficult for her to move. Her eyes were filled with intense fear. Damn it! What the hell is this? The black-robed woman let out a cry of alarm and struggled with all her might. However, even with all her strength, she could not break free from the black hole's shackles. The more she urged her majestic strength to resist, the faster the black hole swallowed her strength. While she was filled with horror, the black-robed woman stared at the black hole. She could vaguely see layers of gray fog and a gigantic figure standing between the sky and the earth. However, she did not have time to pay attention to these, nor did she have time to investigate what the gigantic black figure was. "High Priest, save me!" The black-robed woman panicked and cried for help. Just as her voice fell, a cloud of black fog appeared outside the stone room with a whoosh and condensed into a tall and sturdy old man. This man was more than 2 meters tall and was as strong as an iron tower. The skin on his hands, feet, and neck was purple. He was also wearing a black robe. His long purple hair was tied into dozens of long braids, and his large feet were bare. It was unforgettable. Like the black-robed woman, the old man also came from the bottom of the cliff. Previously, when the black-robed woman was dealing with Ji Tianqing, he hid in the darkness not far away and was on guard. When he heard the black-robed woman's cry for help, he hurried over to save her. His eyes looked through the cold iron door and stared at the mysterious black hole. His blood-red eyes were filled with intense fear. "Blood Moon Infanta, you shouldn't have provoked this person." The high priest shouted with a grave expression. He stretched out his hand and untied a 3-meter-long black whip from his waist. The whip was made of an unknown material. It was dark purple and covered with fine scales, making it look like a black snake. The high priest shook his wrist and let the whip pass through the cold iron door. The tip of the whip coiled around the waist of the Blood Moon Infanta. He let out a low growl and exerted all the strength he had in his life, pulling the long whip with all his might. The whip lit up with a purple radiance and emitted an extremely powerful force. It immediately pulled the immobile Blood Moon Infanta out of the black hole. Bang! The Blood Moon Infanta crashed into the cold iron door. The door, which was as thick as a palm, caved in and created a large hole. She collapsed on the ground with a dispirited expression. She gasped for breath violently and revealed a look of lingering fear. Too terrifying. 60% of my power was devoured. What exactly is that black hole? How can it have such terrifying power? She looked at the mysterious black hole with a heart full of fear and muttered with a hoarse voice. The high priest also stared at the mysterious black hole and reminded her in a low voice, "Blood Moon Infanta, there was a commotion just now. We have to leave quickly. Otherwise, we will be discovered by the people of the sky-bearing sect." The Blood Moon Infanta glared at Ji Tianqing unwillingly. Then she turned into a black shadow and went out through the bars of the cold iron door. In the blink of an eye, the Blood Moon Infanta and the high priest turned into a ball of black fog and went out of the dark wind cave. In the Crimson Cloud Palace where the sect master lived on the Crimson Cloud Peak of the sky-bearing sect. In a secret room filled with multicolored brilliance and dense spiritual qi of heaven and earth like clouds and mist, Chu Tiansheng was sitting upright in the middle of a formation and cultivating. In the air half a meter above the ground in front of him, there was a black turtle shell the size of a wash basin. The turtle shell was simple and mysterious. It was engraved with complicated patterns and thousands of silver light spots. The edges of the turtle shell were very round and smooth. It was obvious that it was often held in the palm of someone's hand and had been there for a long time. Suddenly, the silver light spots on the black turtle shell changed and moved quickly. In the blink of an eye, they arranged themselves into several strange silver lines. Chu Tiansheng, who was cultivating with his eyes closed, sensed the abnormality. He quickly opened his eyes and stared at the silver lines on the turtle shell. After a while, his expression changed and he frowned. He muttered in a low voice, "The star chart shows the aura of the demon race. The demon race has sneaked into our sect. Could it be that the people of the demon race have come for that unparalleled demon?" Chapter 131. Chu Tiansheng ended his cultivation and quickly walked out of the secret room. A moment later, he entered the sky-raising palace and let the guards ring the assembly bell. Not long after, many elders in purple robes rushed to the sky-raising palace. There were a total of 12 elders in the sky-raising sect. Except for 3 elders who had matters to attend to, the other 9 elders were all present. After everyone entered the main hall, they saw Chu Tiansheng with a dignified expression and a touch of worry between his brows. Several elders realized that something was wrong and hurriedly asked. Normally, the sky-raising palace will not ring the emergency assembly bell if there is no major event. Sect Master, why did you call everyone here in such a hurry? Did something major happen? Could it be that the unparalleled demon under the scarlet firmament peak is about to break through the seal? It's very likely. The only thing that can threaten our sect now is that unparalleled demon. The faces of the 9 elders became dignified, full of anxiety and worry. Chu Tiansheng raised his hand and motioned for everyone to quiet down. Then he said in a low voice, "Elders, this king has summoned everyone here because there is indeed a major event to resolve. This matter is indeed related to that unparalleled demon. Just now, there was a change in the star chart. This king observed the star chart and learned that the aura of the demon race has appeared in the sect. Someone from the demon race has sneaked into our sect. This king suspects that those demons have come to rescue the unparalleled demon." Hearing these words, the mood of the elders slightly relaxed and they secretly breathed a sigh of relief. So it's not the unparalleled demon coming out. This old man was worried for nothing. Fortunately, as long as that unparalleled demon hasn't broken through the seal, we still have time. That unparalleled demon has been sealed for thousands of years, but the demons have never been willing to give up. Every few decades, they will sneak into our sect in a vain attempt to destroy the seal and rescue the demon. Yes, we have also fought with the demons openly and secretly. Every time, we can beat them back. There is no need to worry at all." Chu Tiansheng nodded and said with a solemn expression, "Yes, the followers and descendants of that unparalleled demon have been lurking in the depths of the earth, not daring to show their faces. For nearly 1,000 years, they have been trying to destroy the seal and let the unparalleled demon see the light of day again. Fortunately, the star chart can detect the aura of the demons, so they have returned without success every time. But this time is different. The seal has loosened and the demon has awakened. The situation is very critical, everyone must not let their guard down." He glanced at the 9 elders and ordered in a deep voice, "This king order you all to lead a team of guards and immediately start searching the sect. Everyone must find the demons who have infiltrated our sect and kill them on the spot. Even if we can't kill them, we must defeat them and drive them out of our sect." The 9 elders all cupped their hands and bowed, saying that they had received the order. Soon after, everyone took their leave and left the sky-raising palace to carry out their mission and search for the demon race. Chu Tiansheng sat alone on the sect master's throne. He frowned and muttered to himself for a while. He muttered to himself, "The situation is critical this time. The seal is already broken. If the demons destroy it, that unparalleled demon will definitely break the seal. Originally, I gave Ji Ling 2 blood spirit pills. I wanted him to use the medicinal power to refine Xian Jian's bloodline and increase the success rate of reactivating the 9-dragon trapping demon formation. But now it seems that this matter cannot be delayed any longer. I must activate the 9-dragon trapping demon formation as soon as possible to avoid any more problems. After making up his mind, he ordered Yun Yao to bring Ji Ling to the Sky-Raising Palace. After giving the order, he flew out of the Sky-Raising Palace and personally rushed to the Great Peace Palace. Reactivating the 9-dragon trapping demon formation was no small matter. He had to ask someone for instructions. Only with this person's help could he activate the formation. Chu Tiancheng's entire body lit up with scarlet flames. A pair of fiery red wings condensed on his back as he flew in the sky like a large bird. Whoosh! With a flash of fire, he landed outside the Great Peace Palace. A middle-aged mute with a face full of sword scars walked out of the stone house at the entrance. He looked calmly at Chu Tiancheng and bowed. Chu Tiancheng also bowed and returned the greeting. He said calmly, "Sword slave, please report to Martial Uncle that this disciple has an important matter to discuss." The middle-aged mute called the sword slave nodded. He turned and ran into the Great Peace Palace. His figure flashed and disappeared. Chu Tiancheng waited outside the door for 100 breaths of time. The sword slave ran back like a black shadow. He nodded at Chu Tiancheng and gestured for him to enter. Only then did Chu Tiancheng's expression soften. He hurriedly followed the sword slave into the Great Peace Palace and went deep into the palace. A moment later, Chu Tiancheng saw Xiang Wuji covered in the smell of medicine in the pill room of the third courtyard. Xiang Wuji was refining pills. His eyes were focused on the bronze cauldron. He did not notice the medicinal dregs on his hair and beard. Chu Tiancheng hurriedly bowed and said respectfully, "Martial Uncle Wuji, this disciple has an important matter to report." Xiang Wuji was still staring at the cauldron. He kept waving his hand and using his qi to control the fire inside. He did not even look at Chu Tiancheng. He said without turning his head, "If you have something to say, then say it. This old man is busy refining pills." Chu Tiancheng, who was respected by millions of cultivators in the heavenly stellar region, was now acting like a disciple in front of Xiang Wuji. He did not dare to waste time. He hurriedly said, "Martial Uncle Wuji, the star chart changed just now. It detected the presence of demons. There are demons that have snuck into our sect. This disciple has already ordered the 9 elders to search for traces of the demons. But this disciple is worried that a long delay will cause trouble. I plan to immediately bring Ji Ling into the sealing array and reactivate the 9-dragon trapping demon array." Xiang Wuji's hands paused. He frowned and asked, "Ji Ling? The one that Yunyao girl brought back from the clear sky country? The one that the star chart said could change fate?" "That's him." Chu Tiancheng nodded. "This child is the same as senior sister Qiuyu. He also has the bloodline of Xian sword. He should be able to reactivate the 9-dragon trapping demon array." Xiang Wuji turned and asked with a serious face, "This matter concerns the secrets of our sect." "Chu Tiancheng, are you sure?" Chu Tiancheng frowned and thought for a moment. Then he nodded. "This disciple is sure." "Good. Then this old man will go with you to the demon cave." Xiang Wuji did not care about the unfinished pills in the cauldron. He brought Chu Tiancheng out of the cauldron. The two used their qi to form a pair of wings. They flew across the sky like big birds and soon arrived at the Red Cloud Peak. When the two entered the sky-supporting palace, Yunyao also arrived with Ji Ling. After Chu Tiancheng let Yunyao leave, he brought Xiang Wuji and Ji Ling into a secret room in the palace. The secret room was protected by a powerful array. There was also a teleportation array in the room that only Chu Tiancheng could activate. When Chu Tiancheng used a secret technique to activate the teleportation array, a blazing white door appeared in the secret room. The three of them only needed to step through this door to reach the demon cave beneath the Red Cloud Peak. That was the place where the demons were suppressed. Chapter 132. In the secret room, the white portal lit up. Chu Tiansheng was not in a hurry to enter the portal. He looked at Ji Ling with a serious expression and warned him. Ji Ling. This matter is very important and is the sect's biggest secret. When we enter the underground, you just have to do as I say. Don't look around, ask questions, and don't reveal anything. Do you understand? Ji Ling guessed that he was about to come into contact with the sect's core secret. He was about to soar. He was very excited, but on the surface, he still had to pretend to be calm and collected. He nodded at Chu Tiansheng and said in a serious tone, I will follow sect master's orders. I will not ask anything that I shouldn't ask, and will not reveal anything. If he could, he would swear on the spot to show his loyalty to Chu Tiansheng. Chu Tiansheng was very satisfied with his reaction and attitude. His expression softened a lot. Xiang Wuji looked on coldly. He secretly looked at Ji Ling. No one knew what he was thinking. Let's go. We should go in. After saying that, Chu Tiansheng stepped into the portal. A white light flashed in the portal, and his figure disappeared in an instant. Ji Ling followed closely behind and stepped into the portal. Xiang Wuji was the last. When the three of them entered the underground cave, the secret room regained its silence. The white portal also slowly disappeared. Ji Tianqing slowly woke up in a daze. He did not know how long had passed. It could have been half a day or a whole day. He only knew that his chest hurt like a knife. Every time he breathed, he felt a burning pain. His mouth and nose were full of the smell of blood. The blood had already dried up. Cough cough, he coughed twice, and a lot of dark red blood foam came out of his mouth and nose. Such a simple action affected his injuries. He was in so much pain that he broke out in a cold sweat. He struggled to get up, but his body was in so much pain that he could not do it for the time being. Helplessly, he could only lie on the cold ground and think about what had happened. I didn't die. Where did that cruel and vicious black-robed woman go? After she knocked me out, she actually injured me so badly. He glanced at his chest. His green robe had been completely burned, revealing the ice hornless armor underneath. However, the ice hornless armor's radiance was also very dim. It was obviously damaged. Fortunately, I have the ice chi armor. It must have saved my life at the critical moment. Otherwise, would have died long ago. Ji Tianqing heaved a sigh of relief and thought to himself that he was lucky. After resting on the ground for 10 minutes, he finally recovered some of his strength. Only then did he get up and sit in the corner. He looked around and saw that the walls of the stone room were full of cracks and huge holes. The black iron door was also twisted like a fried dough twist, and there was a huge dent in it. Ji Tianqing was filled with shock as he watched. He only felt that the black-robed woman was both cruel and powerful. She actually possessed such terrifying destructive power. Damned black-robed alien. He cursed in a low voice and took out some healing pills from his 100 treasures brocade pouch, stuffing them into his mouth and swallowing them. After that, he sat cross-legged in the corner and began to circulate his energy to refine the pills, using the medicinal power to heal his injuries. The cave was still dark and silent. There was still a cold wind below the cliff, constantly pouring into the stone room. About 12 hours later, half a day had passed. Ji Tianqing finally ended his cultivation. After the medicinal power of the pills, his injuries had basically stabilized and there were no major problems for the time being. However, if he wanted to fully recover, he still had to rest for at least half a month. Ji Tianqing looked at the dark cave outside the cold iron door and frowned as he fell into deep thought. I've been locked up for 12 days. There are only 3 days left until the end of the month assessment. I'm now a criminal. I can't even prove my innocence. What assessment do I need? He laughed at himself and muttered in a low voice, that black-robed woman is from the alien race. I wonder what she's up to in the sect. I hope the sect finds her quickly and kills her or chases her out. I hope Ke wakes up soon. That way, I can prove my innocence and let that damned Ji Ling be punished. After letting his imagination run wild for a while, Ji Tianqing slowly calmed down and continued to circulate his energy to heal his injuries and cultivate. It was late at night. On the Red Cloud Peak, in the hidden secret room in the depths of the palace. The dark secret room suddenly lit up with white light and condensed into a blazing white teleportation gate. In the next moment, 3 figures walked out of the teleportation gate and returned to the secret room. These 3 people were Chu Tianqing, Xiang Wuji, and Ji Ling. However, Chu Tianqing's expression was very serious. His eyes were gloomy and filled with confusion. How can this be? That's impossible. He muttered to himself, full of unwillingness. Ji Ling's expression became even uglier. His empty eyes were filled with unwillingness. He lowered his head and stood beside Chu Tianqing, looking as if he had lost his soul. His mood was extremely gloomy. Xiang Wuji's expression was also very gloomy. His eyes contained a hint of anger, but he had been holding it in. The blazing white teleportation gate quickly dissipated. The 3 of them silently walked out of the secret room and returned to the heaven-raising hall. The light in the large heaven-raising hall was dim. Only the stone lamps on the walls were lit with dim yellow light. Chu Tianqing was silent for a while before saying to Ji Ling, "Ji Ling, you can leave. Return to the storm courtyard and stay there. You can't reveal anything about today's matter to anyone. Otherwise, I will punish you severely." Ji Ling lowered his head with an ugly expression. He could only salute and say, "Disciple understands. Disciple will take his leave." With that, he turned and walked out of the heaven-raising hall, returning to the storm courtyard with grief and indignation. Only Xiang Wuji and Chu Tianqing were left in the heaven-raising hall. The atmosphere was a bit stifling. Chu Tianqing hesitated for a moment before bowing to Xiang Wuji and saying, "Martial uncle. Disciple was incompetent and didn't succeed in reactivating the array. Martial uncle, please punish me." Xiang Wuji glanced at him and sneered, "Hee. You are the sect master. How can this old man punish you? Should I punish you by abdicating?" "Humph. Before entering the devil's den, this old man repeatedly asked you if you had thought it through? Did you find the right person? And the result? That Ji Ling you found couldn't activate the array at all. Even if you are sure that he has the Xianjian bloodline, what's the use of that little bit of bloodline power? The 9 dragons trapping demon array didn't even react. Now, it's all for nothing. The array wasn't successfully activated, and this old man even lost 20 spirit stones. Moreover, that Ji Ling looks loyal and honest on the surface, but in reality, he secretly knows about the devil's den and already knows our sect's biggest secret." Xiang Wuji was unable to restrain his anger. His entire old face was somewhat distorted, and his white beard flew up in anger. "Chu Tianqing. Now tell this old man, how are you going to deal with it? How can you guarantee that Ji Ling won't leak our sect's secret?" Chapter 133. Faced with Xiang Wuji's storm-like questions, Chu Tianqing immediately revealed an ashamed expression. He bowed and lowered his head. After a moment of silence, he said in a deep voice, "Martial uncle, this is indeed Disciple's negligence. Disciple will definitely think of a way to remedy it. Although Ji Ling already knows this secret, he is still an outer sect disciple. I will have the Wind Cloud Courtyard's deacon secretly keep an eye on him. I won't let him leak any secrets. Xiang Wuji nodded, tacitly agreeing with Chu Tiancheng's actions. He frowned and said with lingering anger, Chu Tiancheng, in the future, you have to think before you make any decisions. Don't make arbitrary decisions. Although you are the sect master, the sky-bearing sect isn't under your control. Even if you were the strongest among your peers back then, you definitely aren't the best candidate to be the sect master. Just like this old man, I was also the strongest among my fellow disciples. But this old man knows his own limits. I definitely won't be the sect master, lest I ruin the sect's 1,000 years of foundation. Xiang Wuji's words could be said to be harsh. He mercilessly criticized Chu Tiancheng for being strong but not having the corresponding talent. Chu Tiancheng's face alternated between green and white, but he could only humbly accept the advice and didn't dare to refute it. Perhaps because Xiang Wuji had said too much, or perhaps because he was feeling irritated, he took out a jug of wine from his black thumb ring and sat in the main hall, minding his own business. Chu Tiancheng didn't dare to dissuade him. He could only take out the simple and mysterious tortoiseshell and silently observe it. He used a secret technique and poured origin energy into the tortoiseshell. The silver dots on the tortoiseshell immediately began to change. A moment later, the silver dots arranged themselves into several lines, forming a mysterious pattern. When Chu Tiancheng saw the pattern, his mind shook and his eyes revealed a trace of surprise. Martial uncle. Quickly look, I used the fated star chart to deduce the result. The person we are looking for is actually still in the sect. Xiang Wuji was holding the jug of wine and drinking in large mouthfuls. When he suddenly heard this, he almost spat out the wine in his mouth. He suddenly turned his head to glare at Chu Tiancheng and angrily scolded, Chu Tiancheng. Do you have a pig's brain? You didn't expel Ji Ling from the sect, so of course he's still in the sect. Chu Tiancheng hurriedly explained, Martial uncle, the person shown on the star chart isn't Ji Ling, but someone else. Someone else? Xiang Wuji was also startled. His face was full of confusion as he asked, according to the star chart, the person who defied fate came from the imperial Qing dynasty. Since the person who defies fate is still in our sect and not Ji Ling, then things will be easy. Go and check how many disciples we have from the royal Azure dynasty and then carefully screen them. Chu Tiancheng quickly put away the star chart and nodded, disciple obeys. He hadn't expected the result to be like this. The heavens were actually so fond of the Sky Pillar sect. Although Ji Ling was unable to reactivate the 9-dragon trapping devil formation and wasn't someone who defied fate, the true person who defied fate was still in the Sky Pillar sect. Chu Tiancheng finally breathed a sigh of relief. His heart was filled with anticipation. The next morning, Chu Tiancheng gathered the 9 elders in the Sky Pillar Hall for a meeting. He sat on the sect master's throne and calmly swept his gaze over the 9 elders in the hall. He asked in a deep voice, yesterday, this seat asked you to investigate the demon invasion. What's the result? Outer sect elder Chu Huaishan immediately stepped forward and respectfully reporting to sect master, last night we found the invading demons. There were 2 of them, one old and one young. The old man is the high priest of the demon tribe. As for the young woman he brought, her identity is unknown. She should be a noble child of the demon tribe. When this subordinate discovered their tracks, this subordinate joined forces with 2 other elders to besiege them. Unfortunately, they used the smoke catcher umbrella and escaped again. Chu Tiancheng slightly frowned. After pondering for a moment, he nodded and said, that high priest is our sect's sworn enemy. Within 100 years, he has infiltrated our sect 3 times in a vain attempt to rescue the demon. Unfortunately, he has the smoke catcher umbrella. Even if this seat personally took action, I might not be able to capture him. You've already done your best. This seat does not blame you. If you can drive them out of the sect, they won't dare to invade again in the short term. After he finished speaking, Chu Huaishan cupped his hands and bowed, then returned to the group of elders. Immediately after, the Spirit Medicine Hall elder took 2 steps forward and reported to Chu Tiansheng, reporting to Sect Master, "This subordinate has something important to report." Chu Tiansheng slightly nodded and asked, "What is it?" The Spirit Medicine Hall elder calmly said, "The outer sect's White Dew Courtyard's female disciple, Ji Ku, has been treated by this subordinate and regained consciousness last night. The internal strife that occurred 13 days ago in the outer sect should also have a conclusion. Originally, there was no need for Chu Tiansheng to deal with the internal strife of the outer sect's disciples. However, that matter was related to the outer sect's disciple, Ji Ling, so the outer sect elder Chu Huaishan had already reported it to him. Now that he heard the Spirit Medicine Hall elder's report, Chu Tiansheng pondered for a moment and nodded, "All right, take this seat to her in a moment. This seat wants to ask her face to face." Following that, another 2 elders reported some matters of the sect. They were all ordinary sect matters. Chu Tiansheng made a decision on the spot and handed it over to the elders to carry out. After half an hour, the meeting ended and the elders left the Sky Pillar Hall one after another. Chu Tiansheng also followed the Spirit Medicine Hall elder. After leaving the Sky Pillar Hall, he rushed to the Spirit Medicine Hall on the Spirit Medicine Peak. The Spirit Medicine Hall was located at the peak of the mountain and was an important place in the Sky Pillar sect. Ordinary disciples were not allowed to approach it. Hundreds of lofty palaces were surrounded by lush, towering trees. The palaces were shrouded in white clouds and thick fog, making the Spirit Medicine Hall seem like a fairyland. In one of the palaces of the Spirit Medicine Hall, there were hundreds of spacious and bright rooms set up with formations. They were specially used to treat the injuries of the sect's disciples. Chu Tiansheng followed the Spirit Medicine Hall elder into a room filled with the smell of medicinal herbs and saw 2 women in the room. One of the young girls was Ji Ku. She was lying on the bed with a pale face. Her eyes were dim and lifeless. Clearly, she had yet to recover her vitality. The other young girl was a servant of the Spirit Medicine Hall. She was carefully taking care of Ji Ku, holding a bowl of medicinal soup and feeding her medicine. Seeing the Spirit Medicine Hall elder and Chu Tiansheng enter the room, the servant hurriedly bowed respectfully, put down the bowl of medicine, and left. Ji Ku couldn't get up and bow, so she nodded in greeting. The Spirit Medicine Hall elder said to her with a kind expression, "Ji Ku, this is our sect's sect master. He specially came to see you and ask about what happened that day. From beginning to end, tell him everything in detail. You must tell him the truth. Don't hide anything." Chapter 134. When she mentioned what happened that day, Ji Ku's emotions became somewhat agitated. Her eyes were filled with anger, and she immediately recounted the events from beginning to end. "At noon that day, I was cultivating in my residence in the White Dew Courtyard when a female disciple suddenly delivered a letter to me." The Spirit Medicine Hall elder and Chu Tiansheng calmly looked at her and listened attentively. Time slowly passed, and the more Ji Ku spoke, the more agitated she became. When she spoke of how she was stabbed by Ji Ling and pushed off the cliff, her emotions were both sorrowful and angry, and tears welled up in her eyes. "I really didn't expect this. Ji Ling is actually cruel and vicious to this extent. He is my imperial uncle, my imperial father's younger brother. He didn't even let off a niece like me. He's simply a beast that's worse than a pig or a dog." When he heard this, the truth was already revealed. Chu Tiansheng's expression was somewhat gloomy, and his brows were tightly knitted. He recalled that Xiang Wuji had said last night that Ji Ling appeared to be loyal and honest on the surface, but was actually secretly observing the situation in the underground demon's cave. Now, Ji Ku's words proved that Ji Ling was a cold-blooded, ruthless, and despicable villain. Chu Tiansheng had to admit that his martial uncle Xiang Wuji was indeed good at discerning people. He was able to see through a person's nature in an instant. He also had to consider how to deal with the situation now that Ji Ling knew about the underground demon's cave. At this moment, the spirit medicine hall elder sighed and comforted Ji Ku with a kind tone. He was a stooped, white-bearded old man with a kind face. He had always been gentle and magnanimous, and was the most popular person in the Sky Pillar sect. Ji Ku wiped away the tears in her eyes and sincerely thanked the spirit medicine hall elder. Chu Tiansheng frowned and pondered for a moment before coming up with an idea. He solemnly said to Ji Ku, you can focus on recuperating in the spirit medicine hall. I will make a decision on this matter. With that, Chu Tiansheng turned to leave. Ji Ku was clearly unwilling and quickly said anxiously, Sect Master, Ji Ling is unforgivable. You can't let him off so easily. And Big Brother Tianqing, I heard that he was wronged and imprisoned in the Dark Wind Cave. Now that more than 10 days have passed, I don't know how he has been tortured. Please let him go. However, Chu Tiansheng walked out of the room without looking back. He didn't respond to her words at all. Ji Ku looked disappointed and worried. She couldn't help but start sobbing again. The spiritual medicine hall elder hurriedly comforted her, Ji Ku, don't worry. Our sect has its own rules. The sect master will definitely follow the sect's rules and will not protect anyone. Although Ji Ku was worried, there was nothing he could do. He could only nod. At this point, she could only silently pray that Ji Tianqing would be fine. Chu Tiansheng returned to the sky-raising palace with a solemn expression and summoned Yunyao and the discipline hall elders. When Yunyao and the discipline hall elder entered the main hall, he immediately gave the order. Elder Huang, immediately bring Ji Ling and his 2 accomplices to the main hall. I want to punish them. Yunyao, quickly go to the Dark Wind Cave and bring Ji Tianqing here. I want to judge this matter in person and clear his name. The discipline hall elder didn't say much. He immediately cupped his fists and walked out of the main hall to carry out the order. Yunyao stayed behind and asked doubtfully, Master, has Ji Ku woken up and you already know the truth? Chu Tiansheng nodded and said, yes, that female disciple woke up last night. I just came back from the spiritual medicine hall and questioned her face to face. Yunyao nodded and asked again, Master, did you fail to activate the array when you brought Ji Ling into the underground demon's cave last night? Chu Tiansheng nodded expressionlessly and said, that's right. He is not someone who defies fate. The person we are looking for is still in our sect. A strange look flashed through Yunyao's eyes. She already understood something in her heart. However, her thoughts were meticulous, and she had always done things flawlessly. She was very steady. Although she knew the answer in her heart, she wasn't completely sure, so she wouldn't say it rashly at this moment. Disciple will take her leave. She bowed to Chu Tiansheng and left the heaven-raising palace, rushing to the Dark Wind Cave. About a quarter of an hour later, she entered the Dark Wind Cave and came to the stone room door. When she saw that the cold iron door was dented and twisted, and the stone room's walls were full of cracks and big handprints, she immediately frowned. Ji Tianqing was sitting in the corner, cultivating. His face was pale, and his body was stained with blood. It was obvious that he had been injured. She woke Ji Tianqing up and asked with a frown, Junior brother Tianqing, what's going on? Ji Tianqing understood why she was asking, so he answered truthfully, yesterday, a woman wearing a black robe climbed out of the cliff and wanted to kill me without any explanation. After listening to him, Yunyao understood that it was a demon expert who had secretly invaded. Judging from the damage to the cold iron door and the stone room's walls, the demon woman was very strong. Ji Tianqing was only severely injured. It was already extremely fortunate that he was still alive. She didn't ask much about this matter. Junior brother Tianqing, Ji Ku has woken up. The sect master ordered me to take you to the heaven-raising palace. After saying this, she took out a key and unlocked the cold iron door. Ji Tianqing immediately revealed a look of joy and said excitedly, "That's great. I knew that Ke was lucky and would definitely wake up. Damn Ji Ling, it's time to admit your guilt and be executed." Then, he walked out of the stone room and followed Yunyao out of the dark wind cave, rushing to the heaven-raising palace. When the two of them entered the heaven-raising palace, there were already 4 people standing in the main hall. These 4 people were the discipline hall elders, Ji Ling, Jian Yu, and Lu Mingyang. Chu Tiansheng sat in the main seat with a gloomy expression and remained silent. The atmosphere in the main hall was very oppressive. Ji Ling, Jian Yu, and Lu Mingyang all realized that something was wrong. Their expressions were very ugly, and they felt very nervous. When they saw Yunyao bring Ji Tianqing into the main hall, they were filled with grief and indignation. Their hearts were filled with a strong sense of uneasiness. Ji Tianqing also stared coldly at Ji Ling, his eyes surging with a strong murderous intent. Seeing that everyone was present, Chu Tiansheng said in a low voice, "Last night, Ji Ke woke up after being treated by the spiritual medicine hall elders. Just now, I went to the spiritual medicine hall to question Ji Ke face to face and found out everything that happened that day." At this point, he looked at Ji Ling, Jian Yu, and Lu Mingyang with a dignified expression and shouted sternly, "Do the 3 of you know your crimes?" As his voice rang out, his body emitted an invisible pressure that enveloped Ji Ling and the other 2. The 3 of them immediately turned ashen. They knew that the matter had been completely exposed, and the truth would be revealed today. Jian Yu and Lu Mingyang could not bear Chu Tiansheng's powerful pressure. They immediately knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. "Sect Master, this disciple knows his crimes." This disciple was confused for a moment. "Sect Master, please show mercy." "Sect Master, this disciple will not dare to do it again in the future. Please forgive me." Chu Tiansheng ignored the 2 of them and stared at Ji Ling. He shouted in a deep voice, "Ji Ling, what else do you have to say?" Ji Ling's heart was filled with grief and indignation. He looked like he had lost his soul. A few days ago, he was still in high spirits and was about to become the sect master's favorite person. In the future, he would be a personal disciple and even have the qualifications to compete for the sect master's position. At this moment, he had failed to successfully activate the 9 dragons trapping demon formation and was even exposed. He was about to be punished by the sect's rules. The difference between the 2 situations was huge. It was as if he had fallen from the clouds to hell, making him almost go crazy. At this point, no matter how unwilling he was, he could not use any of his sinister methods in front of Chu Tiansheng. He could only kneel on the ground and kowtow to Chu Tiansheng, begging for mercy. "This disciple knows his crimes. Please punish me, sect master." Chapter 135. Ji Ling, Jian Yu, and Lu Mingyang all knelt down and admitted their guilt. Chu Tiansheng was expressionless as he announced the punishment in a stern tone. "Lu Mingyang, you conspired with Ji Ling and Jian Yu to murder your fellow junior sisters and maliciously frame your fellow junior brothers. You have violated the 3rd commandment of the sect. Since you are an accomplice and have a good attitude, I will strip you of your status as an inner disciple and demote you to the outer disciple. I will also deduct your monthly allowance for half a year." Lu Mingyang was only an accomplice and did not attack Ji Tianqing and Ji Ke. His crime was lighter. Therefore, Chu Tiansheng's punishment was reasonable. Although it was humiliating to be stripped of his status as an inner disciple, Lu Mingyang had no objections and immediately kowtowed. "Thank you for your forgiveness, sect leader. I am willing to accept the punishment and will sincerely repent in the future." Chu Tiansheng nodded and continued to announce, "Jian Yu, you conspired with Ji Ling to murder your fellow junior brothers and junior sisters. You have violated the sects. Since you are an accomplice, I punish you to be confined in the dark wind cave for half a year and deduct 1 year's allowance. When Jian Yu heard the words dark wind cave, his body trembled and his heart was filled with grief and indignation. Of course, he knew how bitter and cold it was in the dark wind cave. He was going to be confined in the dark wind cave for half a year. However, he knew very well that Chu Tiancheng's punishment was reasonable and he could only kowtow and accept his punishment. Disciple Jian Yu is willing to accept the punishment and will definitely reflect on my mistakes. Finally, Chu Tiancheng's gaze fell on Ji Ling. He announced in a low voice, "Ji Ling, you are the mastermind behind this matter. Your vile methods and vicious heart are rare. With your character and the crimes you have committed, you are not worthy to be a disciple of the sect. I have decided to abolish your lifetime's cultivation and expel you from the sect." When he heard the punishment, Ji Ling trembled and was filled with grief, anger, and despair. He had expected that he would be expelled from the sect after the matter was exposed. However, he did not expect Chu Tiancheng to abolish his lifetime's cultivation. This punishment was too heavy. He was once a trash with a damaged dantian. Although the people of Qingyun feared his identity as a prince, they were very disdainful of him. However, he was not willing to be mediocre and had great ambition. That was why he deliberately pretended to be a virtuous gentleman to win the respect of the people of Qingyun. Because he was humiliated by being called a trash. That was why he used Ling Yunfei and schemed to seize Ji Tiancheng's bloodline and his cultivation. Now, he had finally realized his long-cherished wish and entered the Sky Pillar sect of his dreams. His future path of martial arts was vast, and he was about to rise in the Sky Pillar sect. In the future, he would also become a martial arts expert. But now, Chu Tian wanted to cripple his life's worth of cultivation. He was beaten back to his original state, once again becoming the trash prince that everyone ridiculed. How could he accept this? He. Unparalleled anger and humiliation caused his entire body to tremble. He actually lost his mind and crawled up like a madman. His eyes were bloodshot as he shouted angrily, "No! The Sky Pillar Hall was the most sacred place in the Sky Pillar sect. Ji Ling was just an outer disciple, but he dared to roar at the sect master." Chu Tiancheng's face turned gloomy. His eyes flashed with a cold light. Not waiting for him to speak, the discipline hall elder, who was known as the Black Face Fiend, scolded in a cold voice, "Evil creature, you have big dog guts. You dare to behave atrociously in the Sky Pillar Hall." His voice fell. His figure flashed and appeared in front of Ji Ling. Without any explanation, he stretched out his right palm and struck Ji Ling's dantian with a bang. Majestic golden true essence gushed out of his palm. It instantly destroyed Ji Ling's dantian and crippled his cultivation. Ji Ling was sent flying by the palm. He spat out blood and fell 3 meters away. He lay on the ground in a sorry state. Blood kept flowing out of his mouth. He roared with grief and indignation, "Why? Why is it like this? I don't want to." When Jian Yu and Lu Mingyang saw Ji Ling's miserable end, they immediately lowered their heads and knelt on the ground, not daring to move. Compared to Ji Ling's ending, the two of them secretly rejoiced. At the same time, they hated Ji Tiancheng even more. Chu Tiancheng saw Ji Ling struggling on the ground with blood all over his face and roaring. He frowned and ordered, "Throw him out and expel him from the sect immediately." The discipline hall elder nodded and quickly walked to Ji Ling's side. He grabbed him by the collar and dragged him out of the Sky Pillar Hall like a dead dog. At this time, Chu Tiancheng announced again, "Ji Tiancheng, the truth of the matter has come to light. It proves that you are innocent. Go back to the storm courtyard to cultivate." Ji Tiancheng cupped his hands and bowed. He calmly said, "Thank you, sect master." Other than that, he didn't say anything else. This matter was Ji Ling's conspiracy. He was involved in the conspiracy, so he was suspicious. He was imprisoned in the Dark Wind Cave for 13 days. The discipline hall also dealt with him according to the sect rules, so he had no complaints about the sect. Even if he was wronged, the sect didn't deliberately target him. It was enough that he was innocent. He understood that since he had entered a large sect with strict rules, he had to adapt to the sect's rules. Only in this way could he safely survive in the sect. Of course, after this matter, he learned his lesson and raised his vigilance. He would definitely not be easily harmed again. The matter of the disciples' infighting was thus settled. Chu Tiansheng made the judgment, and the discipline hall elder would carry it out. Everyone bowed and left the Sky Pillar Hall. However, after Ji Tianqing left the Sky Pillar Hall, he didn't return to the storm courtyard. He had more important things to do, and that was, to kill Ji Ling. Crippling Ji Ling's cultivation and expelling him from the sect was only the sect's punishment for him. However, Ji Tianqing still wanted revenge. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. When he walked down the Scarlet Firmament Peak, he saw Ji Ling at the foot of the mountain. He was being escorted out of the sect by a discipline hall deacon. Ji Tianqing silently followed, his eyes fixed on Ji Ling's back. His eyes surged with cold killing intent. About an hour later, the discipline hall deacon escorted Ji Ling out of the Sky Pillar sect. At the foot of a mountain several miles away from the Sky Pillar sect, the discipline hall deacon threw Ji Ling to the side of the road and turned to return to the Sky Pillar sect. Ji Ling's clothes were stained with blood as he lay in the grass by the side of the road. He was still cursing furiously. Ji Tianqing. You little bastard, there will be a day when this king will take revenge. And the Sky Pillar sect. Such a cold and heartless sect. One day, this king will wash away today's humiliation and exterminate you bastards. Just as he finished speaking, a cold laugh sounded in his ear. Ji Ling, you definitely won't have the chance to take revenge. Looking for recommendation tickets and bookmarks. This Friday will be faster. 6 chapters a day. I hope that brothers who like this book can give a 5-star review. Chapter 136. Ji Ling's body trembled when he heard the sneer. He immediately turned his head and saw a young man in a green robe standing 10 steps behind him. It was Ji Tianqing, whom he hated to the core and wanted to get rid of even in his dreams. Seeing Ji Tianqing appear with a sneer on his face, Ji Ling's heart skipped a beat. He had a bad premonition. He stared at Ji Tianqing vigilantly and shouted, Ji Tianqing. What are you trying to do? Huh, what am I trying to do? Don't you know? Ji Tianqing sneered as he approached him. His entire body was filled with killing intent. Ji Ling immediately panicked and hurriedly retreated. With a face full of anger, she shouted, Ji Tianqing, don't forget your identity. You're still a subject of the Royal Azure Dynasty. Even if my cultivation is crippled, I am still a prince of the Royal Azure Dynasty. Ji Tianqing sneered disdainfully, this is the ancient star realm, not the Royal Azure Dynasty. Your status as a prince is nothing here. Now that you have been expelled from the sect and your cultivation is crippled, you are a homeless dog. If I don't kill you now, when will I get my revenge? Ji Ling was filled with anxiety and fear. His eyes darted around as he tried to think of a way to escape. He retreated and shouted coldly, Ji Tianqing, don't forget. Your Ji family is still in the Imperial City. Your father and your family are still subjects of the Royal Azure Dynasty. If you dare to kill me, the Imperial clan will definitely exterminate your entire Ji clan. Not even a chicken or dog will be spared. You better not be rash. Think of your father and your family. It would have been fine if Ji Ling didn't mention the Ji family and Ji Changkong, but when he used them to threaten Ji Tianqing became even more furious and murderous. Ji Ling, you despicable, shameless, cruel and vicious bastard. How dare you use the Ji family to threaten me? You will die today without a doubt. After saying that, Ji Tianqing didn't waste any more words with Ji Ling. His figure flashed as he rushed to Ji Ling's side and punched his head. Ji Ling's cultivation was crippled and he was now an ordinary person. It was impossible for him to dodge Ji Tianqing's punch. Bang! With a muffled sound, Ji Ling was sent flying more than 3 meters away. He rolled into the bushes by the roadside. After suffering such a heavy blow, he did not faint. However, blood flowed from his mouth and nose, making him look even more hideous. He struggled to crawl out from the bushes and roared hysterically, Ji Tianqing. This is the ancient star. Ji Tianqing sneered disdainfully. This is no longer the territory of the sky-bearing sect. Moreover, you're no longer a disciple of the sky-bearing sect. Your life is as cheap as a dog's. That punch was for Ku. Now, I want to avenge myself. Go to hell. He roared and rushed to Ji Ling again. He waved his fists and smashed them at Ji Ling's chest and throat. Bang! Bang! 2 muffled sounds rang out. Ji Ling was sent flying again. He flew more than 5 meters away and fell into the dense forest. He rolled a few times before coming to a stop. Then, his head tilted and he breathed his last. There was no longer any sound. Dark red blood flowed out of his mouth and nose and sprinkled on the grass. Ji Tianqing's palms burst with violent true essence. He had already shattered Ji Ling's heart and throat. A moment later, Ji Tian walked to the side of Ji Ling's corpse and reached out to check his pulse and breathing. After confirming that Ji Ling was dead, Ji Tianqing turned and walked out of the forest. Standing on the bluestone path, he loosened his clenched fists and let out a long breath. The blood feud that had plagued him for 3 years had finally dissipated with Ji Ling's death. He had finally avenged Ji Ku and himself. Heaven's justice is clear, retribution is not pleasant. Ji Tianqing roared at the sky, venting the hatred that had been suppressed in his heart. He felt refreshed. After a while, he quickly returned to the Sky Pillar sect. As for Ji Ling's corpse, he was too lazy to pay attention to it. This mountain range was uninhabited, and there were no Sky Pillar sect disciples patrolling it. There were many fierce beasts roaming about. It wouldn't be long before Ji Ling's corpse was eaten by the beasts. Half an hour later, Ji Tianqing returned to the Sky Pillar sect. He walked to the foot of the Sky Pillar peak, but didn't go up the mountain to return to the storm courtyard. He turned and walked to the Spirit Medicine Peak. He decided to go to the Spirit Medicine Hall first to see the seriously injured Ji Ku. After he left, a black-robed figure appeared on the path at the foot of the mountain. This figure was a middle-aged man. It was the Discipline Hall deacon who had escorted Ji Ling away from the Sky Pillar sect. He quickly rushed to the Scarlet Firmament Peak and entered the Sky Pillar Hall. The hall was empty except for the sect master, Chu Tiansheng. He was sitting on the seat of honor with his eyes closed, as if he was waiting for something. After the Discipline Hall deacon entered the hall, he bowed to Chu Tiansheng before walking to him and reporting in a low voice. Reporting to the sect master, this subordinate secretly observed that Ji Tianqing had been tailing Ji Ling all the way in the forest 15 kilometers away. Chu Tiansheng had long expected this result. His expression didn't change as he calmly asked, "Are you sure Ji Ling is dead?" The Discipline Hall deacon nodded and said, "This subordinate is sure." That's good." Chu Tiansheng nodded and said with an indifferent expression, "This matter is over. You may withdraw." The Discipline Hall deacon quickly bowed and excused himself from the hall. After a moment, Chu Tiansheng muttered in a low voice, "This ending is just right. Ji Ling already knows the secret of our sect. How can I let him leave alive?" Clearly, he had already intended to kill Ji Ling when he ordered him to expel him from the sect. In the evening, the sky was dark. In the forest more than 10 kilometers away from the Sky Pillar sect, Ji Ling's corpse was still lying in the grass. The blood on the grass had already solidified. Ji Ling's corpse was also cold and gradually stiffened. Not far away in the forest, a few low beast roars could be heard from time to time. Clearly, wild beasts were approaching. There was no doubt that Ji Ling's corpse would become the wild beast's dinner when night fell. But at this moment, a black wind suddenly blew from the forest, and 2 balls of black fog appeared out of thin air. Swoosh! Swoosh! 2 tall figures in black robes appeared out of thin air in the forest. Their bodies were shrouded in hazy black chi. They were the Blood Moon Commandery Princess and the High Priest of the Demon Tribe. They silently passed through the forest and arrived beside Ji Ling's corpse. The Blood Moon Commandery Princess lowered her voice and said, "According to our investigation, this child once entered the sealing formation with Chu Tiansheng. He should be useful to us. High Priest, he just died not long ago. Can you check if you can use the Blood Demon's secret technique to extract his soul?" The High Priest stretched out his hand. His palm was filled with black fog that enveloped Ji Ling's corpse. He seemed to be using some secret technique. After a moment, he looked up at the Blood Moon Commandery Princess and nodded solemnly. Joy flashed through the Blood Moon Commandery Princess's eyes. She said in a deep voice, "Bring him back. We must use him." Then, the High Priest stretched out his hand and grabbed Ji Ling's corpse. He left the forest with the Blood Moon Commandery Princess and turned into black fog before disappearing. Chapter 137. When night fell, Ji Tianqing left the Spirit Medicine Hall and returned to the Wind Cloud Courtyard. He had just visited Ji Ku and chatted with her for a long time. Knowing that Ku's life was not in danger and that she would recover after a month of rest, he was finally relieved. After returning to the Wind Cloud Courtyard, he didn't dare to sleep and quickly entered the secret room to heal and cultivate. The day after tomorrow was the end of the month and Han Xiaofan would be testing everyone's alchemy. Ji Tianqing had been locked up in the Dark Wind Cave for 10 days and was unable to practice alchemy. He had already fallen behind the other disciples. But even so, he wasn't willing to give up on the Wind Cloud Courtyard's first monthly exam and still wanted to participate in the exam the day after tomorrow. The night quickly passed. After a night of cultivation, Ji Tianqing's injuries had recovered a lot and his complexion had clearly improved. The next morning, after washing up, he left the Wind Cloud Courtyard and headed to the Grand Peace Palace. Although he hadn't been to the Grand Peace Palace for 10 days, he had been locked up in the Dark Wind Cave and couldn't do as he wished. Now that he had regained his freedom, Han Xiaofan's punishment of sweeping hadn't passed yet. He obviously had to follow the sect's rules and continue sweeping the Grand Peace Palace. When the sun rose, Ji Tianqing arrived at the entrance of the Grand Peace Palace. The mute sword servant guarding the door hadn't seen him for 10 days and was stunned when he saw his figure. Ji Tianqing could only explain to the sword servant before he was allowed to enter. After entering the Grand Peace Palace, he consciously took the broom and bamboo basket and swept the dust and leaves in the triple courtyard. However, he had only cleaned for a while when the pill room's door opened. Xiang Wuji opened the door and walked out. He stood under the eaves and yawned, stretching his body. His white hair and beard were still stained with medicinal dregs. When he saw Ji Tianqing in the courtyard, he couldn't help but be stunned. After he came back to his senses, he laughed and scolded, "You stinking brat, you haven't swept in half a month. How come you're back today?" Ji Tianqing hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed to him, then he briefly explained the matter. After Xiang Wuji heard this, the smile on his face became even more mocking. He said with a smile, "TSK, you're really unlucky. You've only been in the sect for less than a month, and you've already encountered so many troubles. You've even been locked up for half a month. Ji Tianqing was speechless and could only smile bitterly. Xiang Wuji yawned again and suddenly thought of something. He waved his hand and said, "Little brat, since you haven't swept the floor for half a month, you should do some work for this old man today. You don't have to sweep the floor anymore. Go to the pill room and help this old man keep an eye on the medicine in the pill furnace. Don't make any mistakes, or else this old man will beat you to death. This old man has stayed up all night. I'm going back to my room to sleep for a while." Then, without waiting for Ji Tianqing's approval, he went back to his room to sleep with his hands behind his back. Ji Tianqing revealed a helpless expression. He could only put down the broom and bamboo basket and enter the pill room to look after the pill furnace. There were 3 pill furnaces in the pill room. The bronze pill furnace in the middle, which was as tall as a person, was emitting green smoke. There was an array at the bottom of the furnace that was constantly emitting a raging fire. He didn't know what kind of medicine was placed in the pill furnace, but the smoke that came out carried a thick fragrance of grass and wood. What Ji Tianqing needed to do was very simple. He only needed to keep an eye on the pill furnace and ensure that no accidents occurred. As long as the array in the pill furnace didn't stop, the fire wouldn't be extinguished. Ji Tianqing sat next to the pill furnace. After staring at it for a while, he felt a little bored. He looked around and saw that on the table in the corner, there were a few old books. These books were all related to alchemy. They were flipped open and placed on the table. Ji Tianqing picked up one of the ancient books. After reading a few pages, his expression changed and a hint of joy flashed across his eyes. This ancient book contains profound knowledge about alchemy. Outer sect disciples can't even come into contact with it. I didn't expect that the old man would place these precious books on the table so casually. I have to read more when he's sleeping. It'll be difficult to see them again in the future. Thus, he sat in front of the table and carefully read the alchemy book. Time passed quietly. Unknowingly, half a day had passed. Ji Tianqing finished reading the entire book and didn't feel hungry or tired. After reading the entire alchemy book, his understanding of alchemy had deepened. He gained many insights and thoughts. Previously, he still had many things that he didn't understand about alchemy. Now that these problems were easily solved, he was enlightened. Unknowingly, his alchemy skills and knowledge had increased by a lot. At noon, Xiang Wuji was still sleeping in his room. He hadn't shown his face yet. Ji Tianqing put down the book and started to think about the content of the monthly examination tomorrow. The monthly examination is tomorrow. We have to refine the spirit accumulation pill, green jade pill, and heart nourishing pill. It's a pity that I haven't practiced before. The chances of failure are very high. When he thought of this, he became anxious and worried. He frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at the bronze cauldron not far away. He then looked at the medicine cabinets around him. Suddenly, a bold idea popped up in his mind. The old man has a cauldron and all kinds of herbs. Why don't I borrow his alchemy room and try to refine those 3 pills? Anyway, the old man has a good heart. Those 3 pills are only top-grade elemental level. The ingredients aren't that expensive, the old man shouldn't mind, right? After hesitating for a while, Ji Tianqing mustered up his courage and began to try refining the pills. He followed the formula of the 3 pills and gathered all the ingredients in the medicine cabinets. Then, he activated the array of the bronze cauldron and used his true yuan fire to preheat the cauldron. When everything was ready, he began to refine the spirit accumulation pill. He followed the fixed order and placed the 12 herbs into the cauldron. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. The spirit accumulation pill should be ready. However, when Ji Tianqing opened the lid of the cauldron, he smelled a burnt smell. When he opened the cauldron, he found that there were no pills in the cauldron. There was only a pile of black ash. My first attempt at refining pills and I actually failed. Luckily no one saw it. Otherwise, it would be so embarrassing. Ji Tianqing was a little embarrassed. He hurriedly cleaned up the black ash in the cauldron. However, Xiang Wuji had come to the alchemy room. He was leaning on the door and looking at him with a cold smile. The ingredients in the alchemy room are correct. The steps are also correct. But you forgot to control the fire. You idiot. You only know how to follow the instructions. How can you successfully refine the pills? Ji Tianqing's body shook and he turned to look at the door. Seeing Xiang Wuji, he hurriedly squeezed out an awkward smile. Senior, why are you awake? Aren't you going to sleep a little longer? The cold smile on Xiang Wuji's face deepened as he scolded, this old man can smell something burning from 3 rooms away. How can I sleep? Humph. I'm afraid that if I sleep a little longer, you'll burn all my herbs like firewood. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.